overflowed of joy and fun, and Holly could not remember another Christmas holiday at Hogwarts like it. There were so many students here, most of them staying for the Yule Ball, that the usual empty halls and deserted common rooms were bursting with people. Holly woke on Christmas morning not only excited to get her presents but for the Yule Ball. She had barely slept, she was so nervous, but the idea of dancing with Ginny was an exciting one. She smiled as she saw a new, somewhat haphazardly wrapped present on the top of her pile. Holly had sent Dobby a pair of novelty Muggle socks via Hedwig last night. There was a Christmas tree in every dorm room in Gryffindor Tower, and each was decorated by the students in it. The one in Holly's dorm room was full of transfigured decorations and enchanted tinsel. "Merry Christmas," Holly Hermione said, and that set off a chorus of good wishes from and to all of the girls in the dorm room. Then they all rushed to open their presents. Holly opened Dobby's gift first, and she smiled as she saw the pair of mismatching, animated socks he'd given her. Hermione had given Holly a book on Quidditch teams, whilst Holly had given her a book on the most outrageous cheaters of the Triwizard Tournament. "Oh, I've been wanting to read this one for a while." "Thank you," Holly Hermione said. "I gave it a little read before I wrapped it. Some of those old headmasters and champions really did not try very hard not to get caught," Holly said. She'd also gotten a bag of Peruvian instant darkness powder from Ron, who'd gotten it from the twins, and a new wrist holster for her wand from Ginny. Sirius had given her 2 gifts, an enchanted pocket knife that could have many different blades and magical nail polish he claimed was just about indestructible. Hagrid had sent her a greatly appreciated box of sweets, and Mrs. Weasley had sent her usual gifts of a hand-knitted sweater and some mince pies. Holly gladly put on the green sweater, because the snow was already falling outside, and she and Hermione went downstairs to the common room. Ginny thanked Holly profusely for the broom servicing kit Holly had given her, as did Ron for the new keeper's pads. They spent most of the morning simply lounging around in the common room, enjoying their presents. That afternoon was Christmas lunch at Hogwarts on a scale Holly had never before seen. More than 100 turkeys lined the tables of the Great Hall, and there were traditional Christmas foods from France and Scandinavia, much like at the feast, to welcome the students from Bosbatons and Durmstrang. Holly had wanted to have another snowball fight, but the wind had started up and it was snowing too hard to really be outside, so she ended up hanging out in the common room until a few hours before the ball. She was a ball of nerves as she headed upstairs along with Hermione and Ginny, to the disbelief of Ron that anyone could take that long to get dressed. The actual act of getting into her green dress robes would not take all that long, but doing her hair, her makeup and glamour charms, that would take a while, and there was a huge line to use the girls' showers. The sound of hair-drying charms could be heard throughout the tower, and Holly used the time it took her now well past shoulder-length hair to dry to apply the enchanted nail polish Sirius had given her for Christmas. She had her hair up after that, with a little help from Lavender Brown, and then she did her makeup. Not wanting to look like a raccoon, she politely tuned Lavender's help down that time. She felt odd and silly spending so much time on her appearance, but she was startled when looked into the mirror and saw a very pretty girl there. "You look amazing," Holly Hermione said from behind her, and Holly turned to respond only to see something very odd. Hermione's voice was coming out of someone else's mouth because the girl in the pink dress robes could not be her bushy-haired friend. So do you, Hermione. How did you, your hair?" Holly said, not quite able to speak in complete sentences. "Entirely too much hair potion to ever do it again, I'm afraid. But I need to go meet my date, and I can't be seen. Lend me your cloak?" Hermione asked. Holly blinked. "Sure," Holly said, and opened up her trunk. She handed the cloak to Hermione and then wondered what that was all about. Just after Hermione left, there was a knock on the door. Holly's heart jumped as she realized who it would be. She got up and opened the door, and saw Ginny standing there. Her dress robes were second-hand, true, but someone had completely transformed them. She wasn't wearing as much makeup as even the girls in Holly's year, but there were just a few glamour charms on her face. "You look beautiful," Holly told her, and took her hand almost hesitantly. "So do you," Ginny said, and then there was a shriek of excitement from behind Holly. "That's who you're going with? I can't believe it, oh, the two of you look so cute together," Lavender said, and then the rest of the girls swarmed Ginny and Holly. "I can't believe you actually did it," Ginny Parvati said, shaking her head. Let's go down, yeah. Holly said to Ginny, and they walked down into the common room holding hands. There was a commotion as they walked down together, although they were not the only couple that descended from the dorms together. It was strange to see so many people dressed up in colorful dress robes in the common room, Holly thought. I can't believe it. Are my eyes working right, George? Fred said. I think they are, Fred. Is that our devilish little sister with Holly? George said. Don't make me come over there, you two. And don't be weird to Holly. Ginny said. We'd never be weird to Holly. She's a lovely girl who you better treat right, young lady. Fred said. We're warning you, we'll be right cross if you mess around with her feelings, George followed up, waving his finger. Holly laughed and then so did Ginny and the twins. After finding out that Ron had already gone down to the entrance hall, and reasoning that Hermione was likely already there, Holly and Ginny decided to head down there. When they arrived, they saw no sign of Hermione, but Ron was easy to spot. He was standing next to Luna Lovegood, who was dressed in a bizarre set of neon blue dress robes and had a pair of dirigible plum earrings on. She and Ron were chatting to one another, and laughing a little. Ron. Luna. Ginny said. Ginny. Holly. Ron said. Holly and Luna looked at one another and tried very hard not to laugh. So that's who you were going with? I guess if you had to go with anyone, Holly's all right, Ron said. You really did have a date, Ginny said, sounding surprised. Well, I was talking to Luna about the ball, and we both thought it'd be a huge laugh if we went together. So I asked her, Ron said, and Holly smiled. She was already enjoying tonight, and she thought she'd remember it fondly, so long as she didn't trip whilst trying to dance. Chapter 59, Year 4, Chapter 25. Chapter Text. Holly's surprise at Ron's date, and his own surprise to see Holly and Ginny going to the ball together, was nothing next to their surprise when Hermione entered the hall. Holly had seen her with her sleek hair and periwinkle blue dress robes in their dorm, of course, but the candlelight of the entrance hall cast them in an even more impressive light. Ron and Ginny had never seen Hermione so dressed up, and it took Ron a moment to work out who Hermione was. She'd done something to her teeth, Holly now realized, and then she cast her gaze on who Hermione was with. She's with Viktor Krum. Ron sputtered, incredulously. Holly's eyes went wide with surprise, she had not expected Hermione to be here as a date to one of the champions. But here she was, walking into the entrance hall arm in arm with the international Quidditch star and Triwizard champion. I think Hermione might need to watch her back. Half the girls in Hogwarts were angling to go with Krum, Ginny said. I suppose he's handsome enough, but he looks a bit dull, Luna said in her sing-song voice. Champions, over here. McGonagall said, her voice cutting through the bustle and noise of the entrance hall. I guess we better go, Holly said to Ginny, and she nodded back. They made their way through the crowd, and Holly saw the other champions for the first time that night. Cedric was with Cho, and that didn't seem nearly so bad now. Roger Davies, a stunned-looking Ravenclaw, was Fleur's date. Good, you're all here on time. Please wait here, by the doors, you'll enter when the other students have sat down, Professor McGonagall said. She was wearing dress robes made from red tartan and had a wreath of thistles on her hat. Holly and the rest of the champions lined up a little awkwardly just to the side of the doors, and the horde of students began to pile into the hall. Holly felt a little out of place standing next to the radiant Fleur, but she tried not to let that bother her. Then, after all the students had entered, the champions were called forth. McGonagall had them form a line in pairs, and then they walked slowly into a very changed great hall. Gone were the long house tables, instead, there were hundreds of smaller, circular tables. Each was lit by a floating lantern, and the light from the tiny fires caused the numerous ice decorations to glitter like crystal. Everyone applauded as the champions entered, but then Holly heard a few boos as she and Ginny walked into the room. She kept her gaze locked straight ahead, and whoever had made them as quickly shushed. The champions and their dates joined the staff up at the top tables, along with Ludo Bagman and Mrs. Hull. Bagman wore eye-searingly yellow dress robes, whilst Mrs. Hull wore a set of plain black dress robes that looked rather out of fashion, as far as Holly knew anything about wizarding fashion. Holly and Ginny ended up sitting between Bagman and Cedric, and with only a brief glance Holly knew Ginny felt as out of place up here as she did. They were both much younger than anyone else at the table save Hermione, and both of them were a fair bit shorter than her. "Excellent performance in the first task, my dear. Just excellent, the way you sent that dragon flying backwards. Come with a friend, have you?" A wise bagman began, but Holly cut him off. "Ginny's not here as my friend, Mr. Bagman," Holly said. Her voice was polite, but both she and Bagman could understand the firmness that measured tone held. Right. Say, lass, you're the reserve seeker for Gryffindor, aren't you?" "Not too surprising then," Bagman said, but seemed to think better of continuing. Instead of the usual platters piled high with food, there were instead small menus by every plate. Holly picked up hers and scanned through a list of eclectic offerings. For the main course, there was everything from roast duck to goulash, though why anyone would want to eat goulash whilst wearing expensive dress robes on a date was beyond Holly. The options for starters were even more bizarre, including wizarding dishes that Holly had never heard of. She and Ginny had great fun looking through the menus, trying not to giggle at one another. As Holly ordered her food from the house elves below, as she assumed the system worked, she was surprised to see not a goblet of pumpkin juice appear next to her food, but rather a goblet of wine. "You got wine too, huh?" Ginny whispered to Holly in a low voice. Holly supposed it made sense, the champions were all supposed to be of age. "I'm gonna try it and hope no one notices," Holly whispered back, and she tried the wine. It was both sweet and bitter, but it burned much less than the only other real alcohol she'd tried, Fire Whiskey. No one did seem to notice, perhaps because Ludo Bagman then spilled goulash over himself loudly. The brown-red soup stained his bright yellow robes rather noticeably, and he spent a good minute taking a napkin to them before getting out his wand. "How's the wine, Holly?" Cedric said very casually, and Holly nearly spat duck all over her plate. It's not bad," Holly said, her voice a little squeaky. "Do you think Ron and Luna are having a good time?" Ginny asked Holly. "Judging by how they tore through, whatever that is, I think they're at least enjoying the food," Holly said. The elves had gone all out for the ball, making dozens of masterful dishes from half of Europe that could be ordered at will by the witches and wizards in the Great Hall. "You've never seen a roast prowler piglet before?" Ginny asked, curious. "No, and after seeing one cooked and eaten, I'd really rather not meet a live one," Holly said. In her opinion, roast meat should not include so many teeth. The conversation at the top table was eclectic, to say the least. Holly overheard conversations about the secret protections of Durmstrang, Viktor Krum learning to say Hermione's name, and a secret bathroom that would only appear to those truly in need. Eventually, everyone had finished their food and Dumbledore stood up. As he did so, all the plates, goblets, and cutlery vanished into thin air. "If you would all stand and welcome our musical guests for the evening," the Weird Sisters, Dumbledore said, and then he waved his wand. The tables seemed to lift into the air in a complicated dance, until they and the chairs were all neatly lined up along the sides of the hall. There was now also a stage with an assortment of instruments on it. Several extremely high wizards, dressed all in black, artfully shredded robes emerged onto the small stage. They took up their instruments, and Holly was so transfixed by their bizarre appearance that she momentarily forgot that she was at a dance. Then she saw the rest of the champions heading out onto the dance floor. Ginny led her there, hand in hand, and they managed well enough for the champions' first dance. Both of them had only basic instruction in this kind of formal dancing, but their natural agility allowed them to do well enough not to embarrass themselves. The music was restrained, classical and formal, until that first dance ended. "This dancing's not so bad," Holly said. "Maybe you're catching the excess happiness from most of my childhood fantasies being fulfilled at once," Ginny mumbled. Cedric and Cho were the picture of grace, outshining even Fleur with their coordinated dancing. After a few minutes, the Weird Sisters switched to something a little faster, and the rest of the school swarmed the dance floor. Holly and Ginny, now no longer the center of attention, danced for some time. They quickly abandoned their half-taught formal dancing for the wild energy only a crowd of teenagers really has. The Weird Sisters too began to pick up the pace, playing all their popular hits but occasionally mixing in a bizarre waltz interlude. Holly was fairly certain that wasn't how these things were supposed to happen, but then they were a wizarding band. Who knew what odd notions they had? They made their way off the dance floor during one of the waltz periods, managing to slip away from the crowd. They found Ron and Hermione arguing about something, whilst Luna was dancing with Neville. She managed to expertly evade his clumsy steps and Holly laughed fondly. "And what's so wrong with Victor?" Hermione said. "He's from Durmstrang." Ron replied. "So? He's been nothing but lovely to me so far." "They're bad news. No Muggle-born students, dark arts classes. Let's get some air, yeah," Ginny said, and Holly indeed. They left Ron and Hermione to their argument as Hagrid and Madame Maxime began to cut a wide swathe through the dance floor. Holly smiled seeing her friend enjoying himself on what must be a very rare occasion. Fred and George were accosting Ludo Bagman, and the ministry official began to look rather worried. Holly and Ginny walked out through the entrance hall, and they saw that the grounds seemed to have been covered in a maze of rose bushes, stone benches, and fairy lights. A light dusting of snow added to the ambience, and they set off down one of the paths hand in hand. They managed to avoid the older students, mostly by sound, and found somewhere relatively secluded. She sat down next to Ginny, and they both looked up at the star-filled sky without saying anything for a few moments. I'm having a really good time, Holly." "Are we more? Is this more than tonight?" Ginny asked hesitantly. Neither of them had discussed it in those terms, but the question hung over them, unsaid and yet still evident. I don't know," Holly said, and she knew it was not what she wanted to say at once. Her heart was beating rapidly, and it screamed at her a different answer. Ginny looked hurt for a moment, and then Holly acted. It was completely on the spur of the moment, and it was barely the product of conscious thought. She kissed Ginny softly on the lips. It was little more than a chaste kiss, and a clumsy one at that, but it was enough. Part of Holly was screaming at her that this was shameful, or wrong, but she knew that was the part of her that still lived in the cupboard under the stairs. She understood, now, what the older students were on about. I'd like it to be more than tonight," Holly said. She felt like she was stumbling about in the dark, but that was what felt right to her. Her cheeks were bright red, but her smile was wider than she could ever remember. "So would I," Ginny said, and she leant her head against Holly's shoulder. "I don't really know much about, having a girlfriend," Ginny continued. "Neither do I. It can't be that hard, though," Holly said. "I think I'll kiss you next." "That way we're nice and even," Ginny said, as they stood back up and made their way back towards the Great Hall. It seemed that they had picked the perfect time to leave the Rose Garden because Snape and Karkaroff were wandering up and down it blasting couples out of bushes. They were arguing about something, too, but Holly was in far too good a mood to pay much attention to that. Or to what Hagrid was saying to Madame Maxime, for that matter. The rest of the night passed in a swirl of euphoria for Holly. She drank something that was probably fire whiskey, danced with Luna, Cedric, and Cho all one after the other, and then danced to the last song, a slow, romantic number, with Ginny. She still wasn't a great dancer, but she had fun anyway. As all good things do, the Yule Ball ended. Holly staggered up to her dorm room, tired from all the dancing, and as she collapsed straight into her bed she had the biggest grin on her face she could ever remember. Chapter 60, Year 4, Chapter 26. Chapter text. Hermione's hair was back to normal on Boxing Day. Holly thought she looked a little sad about that, but it really had been a lot of hair potions. Holly herself had to spend 10 minutes cancelling malfunctioning glamour charms in front of her mirror. "Did you enjoy the ball, Holly?" Hermione asked, reading through a dry-looking book on the history of transmutive alchemy. "I'm still not sold on dancing, but it was pretty fun," Holly said, blushing when she thought about the kiss she and Ginny had shared. "I noticed Ginny seemed very happy about something," Hermione said. I guess we're girlfriends." "Oh, Merlin." "Hermione, I kissed her," Holly said. She didn't regret it, but it had been rather a spur-of-the-moment decision. "I'm happy for you, Holly. I know she can help you when things are hard," Hermione said, not quite finding the right words. "I don't need help," Holly said, instinctively. She felt the faintest tremor in her wand hand. "I think we both know that's a lie, Holly. Everyone needs help sometimes, even heroines with no sense of self-preservation." "I've got a sense of self-preservation," Holly mumbled. Hermione merely raised one eyebrow and went back to her book. They met up with Ron and Ginny in the common room, which was still mostly deserted. Holly cuddled up next to Ginny on one of the faded red couches, the cold very noticeable now the fire was just embers. "You'll never believe what I overheard last night," Ron said, not even blinking when he saw Holly and Ginny. "What?" Hermione asked, interested. "Well, Hagrid was talking to Madame Maxime, and apparently he's a half-giant," Ron said, looking around to make sure nobody could overhear. Ginny gasped, Holly blinked, and Hermione looked mostly unfussed. "Well, of course he is," Hermione said, her tone matter-of-fact. "Is being a half-giant bad?" Holly asked. She didn't know much about giants, but she couldn't imagine Hagrid being all that bad. He might love interesting critters, but he was kinder than almost anyone Holly had met. "I'm not saying Hagrid's bad, but you know about giants," Ron said, looking very uncomfortable. "I don't know about giants," Holly replied. "Well, they're not very nice." Hagrid said as much himself, "They just really like killing," Ron said. "Okay, but Hagrid's about as harmless as a 9-foot-tall man could be," Holly said. "And you're pretty firmly on the side of good, but people still thought you were a dark witch for being a Parselmouth," Ginny said, looking at Holly meaningfully. Neither of them was all too eager to use their ability to talk to snakes in public. "There aren't any giants in Britain, though. The last ones were wiped out before the Statute of Secrecy." "I wonder how Hagrid's parents met," Hermione said. The last few days of their Christmas holiday passed quickly, with everyone feeling rather spent from the Yule Ball. Quite a few Gryffindors were frantically working on the homework they'd put off in the common room, so Holly and her friends often wandered the halls and the snow-covered ground during the day. Holly and Ginny were a little more affectionate with one another, often holding hands or sitting next to one another. Holly kissed her girlfriend occasionally, which was a thought that seemed amazing to her every time she had it. Ron made faces if they kissed in front of him, despite the very tame nature of it. On the first day of the new term, Holly and her friends received a very unpleasant surprise at breakfast. The front page of the Daily Prophet bore a huge article by Rita Skeeter all about how Hagrid was a half-giant and full of baseless accusations. Some of them were really stretching the limits of plausibility, even for Skeeter, Holly thought. How many people would believe that Goyle had been badly bitten by a flobberworm? This Skeeter bitch has gone too far," Hermione said as they walked towards Care of Magical Creatures, and Holly was amazed to hear Hermione use language like that. Her bookish friend might not be so rules-bound after all their adventures, but Holly had never heard her swear before. "How'd she know is the question, isn't it? Luna and I were the only ones there apart from Hagrid or Madame Maxime. Neither of them would tell Skeeter that stuff," Ron said. "Are you sure Skeeter didn't find out some other way?" Holly asked. "Some of the stuff she printed was pretty specific. Hagrid said he'd never told anyone about some of it," Ron replied. "Are you sure about Luna?" Hermione asked. "Her dad runs well, judging by this rubbish, a competing paper. It's full of stories about crumple-horned Snorkax and made-up conspiracies. She hates the Daily Prophet, and Skeeter even more. Madame Maxime, well, she denied it to Hagrid, but she's gotta be one too, yeah," Ron said. Hermione nodded slowly, obviously thinking hard. "Maybe she's a Legilimens. Doing a reading with just eye contact is pretty hard, but she might be that good," Holly said. "Maybe she's got an invisibility cloak," Ron offered. They had arrived at Care of Magical Creatures by that point, however, and Hagrid wasn't waiting for them. Instead, an elderly witch with close-cropped grey hair stood waiting for them outside of Hagrid's cabin. "Hurry up now, the bell rang 5 minutes ago," she said, her voice sharp and measured. "Who are you?" Ron asked, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Professor Grubbleplank. I am your temporary Care of Magical Creatures professor. Now, get a move on or it's detention for the lot of you," she said, and started to herd them all towards the edge of the woods. The gigantic winged horses that the Beauxbatons carriage used to fly were here, tethered on very long leashes. Standing a little to the side of them, however, was a smaller animal. It was only the size of a regular horse. The unicorn, with pure white hair and a long horn, was not tied down or enclosed in a paddock. It simply stood, looking relaxed, near the winged horses. Many of the girls whispered excitedly when they saw it, and Holly was intrigued. She didn't know much about unicorns beyond what Hagrid had told her in her first year, and that they were magically powerful enough for their tail hairs to work as wand claws. "Boys to the back now," they get nervous around you. Girls, you can approach Professor Grubbleplank said, and without thinking about it Holly walked forward with the other girls. Grubbleplank put her arm out and caught Holly, stopping her from getting any closer. I said boys to the back, Potter. 5 points from Gryffindor for disobeying safety, the professor began, and the entire class seemed to take in a breath. Holly felt like someone had kicked her in the gut. She's not a boy, Professor Hermione said. Her voice was calm but firm, and she looked the older witch right in the eye. Potions alone cannot replicate the sacred feminine aura of Grubbleplank said, but Holly ignored her. Hermione standing up for her had given her the time to react, and so she simply walked towards the unicorn. It neighed at her softly but didn't seem at all bothered. Indeed, it nuzzled its nose against Holly, and she gently patted it. For the rest of the lesson, Grubbleplank kept glaring at Holly, and she found any excuse to dock her points. The whole lesson was unpleasant at best, and to make it even worse Hagrid wouldn't emerge from his cabin to talk to Holly afterwards. Pansy Parkinson kept making snide comments about Hagrid, and about Holly, which went unpunished by Grubbleplank. Care of Magical Creatures, which Holly had always enjoyed, was now her least favorite class. Hagrid wasn't seen at all that first week, and Holly was getting worried about him. He was clearly very upset about the article, and she wished she knew some way to help her friend. Holly soon started practicing her swimming in the Black Lake, the warming runes sewed into her swimming costume allowing her to swim in it without freezing to death. She sometimes saw the other champions there, though only Krum looked to be practicing his swimming like her. Cedric and Fleur both disappeared beneath the surface, scouting out the lake. She did the same one chilly Friday, diving beneath the surface with her bubblehead charm active. It was hard to see in the dark water, but she was able to get a basic layout of the bottom of the lake during the first week of term. She knew where the merpeople lived, where most of the creatures dwelled, and that the giant squid was indeed very, very large. Halfway through January, there was a Hogsmeade weekend. Ginny was very excited, as it was only her second time visiting the magical village. Neither she nor Holly was the type to enjoy Madame Puddifoot's tea shop, but they still walked around the village together. Ron and Hermione went into the Three Broomsticks, and Holly could see them bickering over a game of chess as she walked down the main street of Hogsmeade. Those two really do enjoy arguing, huh? Holly said. She really didn't understand it, and it made her uncomfortable, but she knew she'd never get them to stop. It's balmy. Yoo-hoo, they have new training snitches, let's go look, Ginny said, pointing to the sporting goods shop. They wandered all over Hogsmeade, not doing anything all that different from a usual visit to the village on their date, save that Ginny kissed her once or twice. Holly thought that was pretty good, as far as these things went. When they returned to the Three Broomsticks to meet back up with their friends, however, they arrived to find Hermione screaming at someone. Holly's first thought was that she and Ron had gotten into a real argument, but then she realized what Hermione was saying, and who she was shouting at. You really don't care, do you? You'll hurt whoever it takes for some cheap tabloid rubbish, bad bite from a flobberworm. Did you ever have a single shred of journalistic integrity, or were you born a heartless? Shut up, you silly little girl. You're making my ears ring. Merlin, who do you think you are talking to me like that? Rita Skeeter said, coldly. Someone with half a brain. Hermione retorted, and then she turned towards the exit of the pub and dragged Ron with her. Holly and Ginny followed their friends out, eyes wide. Are you okay, Hermione? Holly asked. Do I look okay? I just screamed at a journalist. At least my parents don't read the Daily Prophet, so there's not all that much she can really do, Hermione said. I wouldn't be so sure, Hermione, Rita Skeeter's one nasty lady. We still don't know how she found out about Hagrid, remember? Ginny said. HMMPH. We'll see. And on the topic of Hagrid, he's not hiding any longer, Hermione said and started charging off towards Hagrid's hut. Holly followed her, and then a second later so did Ron and Ginny. Chapter 61, Year 4, Chapter 27. Chapter text. Hagrid. I know you're in there, open up. Hermione shouted as she pounded on his door. Holly, Ginny, and Ron rushed to catch up to her, and they arrived just in time to see the door to Hagrid's hut swing open. About Hermione began but cut herself off with a high-pitched squeak when she realized that it was Albus Dumbledore, not Hagrid, who was standing in the doorway. "Good afternoon, Miss Granger. Perhaps you and your friends should come inside," Dumbledore said, standing aside to let them in. Holly walked into Hagrid's hut, and the first thing she noticed was a strong smell of fire whiskey. "Hi, Hagrid," Holly said, not really sure what to say to him. Hagrid looked up, and for a moment Holly saw happiness on his face. Then it disappeared into a sort of long-term glumness. "Lo," Hagrid said, his voice hoarse. Everything okay, Hagrid?" Holly asked, sitting down on one of the oversized chairs that littered the hut. "I'll make some tea, yeah," Ron said and headed over to boil some water. "I think that is an ample demonstration of what I have been telling you, Hagrid. These young students still seem to want to know you," Dumbledore said, placing a hand on Hagrid's huge shoulder. "It's not the students," Hagrid began, but Hermione seemed to have gathered her courage. "You can't listen to what that woman says, Hagrid. She's just completely awful and, well, come back. Please," Hermione said. "Hermione's right, Hagrid. I know how much taking care of magical creatures means to you. Don't let Rita Skeeter take it away from you, and we miss you, you know," Holly said. "Exactly the sentiments that I have been bombarded with from concerned parents who remember you from their own days at Hogwarts," Hagrid, Dumbledore said. Not all of them," Hagrid said, wiping away tears. "If you are intent on waiting for universal popularity, Hagrid, you shall be here for a very long time indeed," Dumbledore said, a little more sternly. His eyes gazed very intently at Hagrid through his half-moon spectacles. "And Professor Grubbleplank is awful. She keeps taking points off Holly because she's a prejudiced," Hermione said, and then she looked at Dumbledore and didn't finish the sentence. "Do go on, Miss Granger," Dumbledore said lightly, but Holly could recognize the tone in his voice. "Well, she's just been treating Holly really unfairly, saying she's not a real girl because of some stupid aura," Hermione said. "I'll be back at work on Monday, Headmaster." "I won't stand for that, not in my class," Hagrid said, sitting up. His face was still streaked with tears, but he looked determined. "A sentiment I share, Hagrid. I shall expect you at dinner tonight in the castle. Good afternoon to you all," Dumbledore said, standing as he did so. He walked out of the hut, and Hagrid looked at Holly, Hermione, and Ginny. Ron arrived then with the tea. "I've been right silly about this. I'm sorry you had to go through that cause of me," Holly, Hagrid said. "It's not your fault, Hagrid," Holly said. "I shouldn't have just sat around moping. My old dad would be right ashamed of me, he would. Never shown you lot a picture of him, have I?" Hagrid said, and he stood up. He got out an old, faded, wizarding photograph. Hagrid, clearly very young but still about 7 feet tall, towered over a short wizard. Holly could see the resemblance, though, the eyes, she thought. "He had that taken just after I got into Hogwarts. He was so happy, though I might not be able to on account of my mum. Died in my 2nd year. Dumbledore was the only one who stood up for me after he died. Got me the job as gamekeeper, let me teach. Great man, Dumbledore, gives people second chances. Lets anyone who can do magic come to Hogwarts, even if their family ain't all that respectable, or if they turn into a fuzzy little critter every month. Not a lot of headmasters who'd stick their neck out for a half-giant or werewolf. Certainly not the two louts from Bosbatons and Durmstrang, big-boned, what bollocks," Hagrid said, and Ron suddenly looked very nervous for some reason. "You know what, Holly? You reminded me of me a little bit when you first got here. Mum and Dad gone, feeling like you weren't quite up to it, and look at you now. Order of Merlin, school champion, youngest seeker in a century," Hagrid said. I didn't really do all of that on purpose. Someone entered me," and Holly said. "I know that. But I reckon you probably deserved that award more than most of the tossers they give it to. And, you know what I'd love?" Hagrid said, now looking at Holly quite seriously. "I'd love for you to win it, Holly. Show 'em all you don't have to be some pureblood who fits in all the boxes. That you don't have to be ashamed of who you are," Hagrid continued. "I'll give it my best shot, Hagrid," Holly said, grinning. "Ha, I reckon you will," Hagrid said. Holly's classes were soon back in full swing. She cruised through learning Banishing in Charms, having already mastered the spell and got several headaches learning basic spell analysis in arithmancy. Hagrid seemed determined to outdo Professor Grubbleplank, and he held several lessons on unicorns, which it turned out he did know quite a bit about. He even had a lesson with several golden-haired unicorn foals, who didn't have the same nervousness around boys as full-grown unicorns, so that the boys could have some hands-on experience. She kept up her training for the tournament, and while she wasn't a great swimmer, she was in good enough shape that she was now a good enough one. She also learned, after inquiring with Professor Dumbledore at one of her occlumency lessons, how to transfigure her socks into flippers. That would let her make up the speed on the other champions, who were all older and taller than she was. Hermione, Ginny, and Ron all helped Holly hone her dueling, and soon she was facing two of her friends at once to make things even. She was casting faster and had most of the spells she was likely to use in the competition down silently now. One cold January night, the four of them snuck out to Holly's hidden potions lab in the disused secret passage. Holly looked at her friends, their faces lit only by the glow of the liquid moonlight in their animagus potions. "Are you all sure you want to do this?" Holly asked. "I'm sure," Ginny said, her voice quiet but firm. "Course I am," Mate Ron said. "Holly, if you don't hand over that potion I'm going to hex you," Hermione said. Holly handed Hermione's potion back, having finished looking at it. There seemed to be no obvious defects, just like Ron and Ginny's, but she couldn't know until they transformed. It was nerve-wracking to watch her friends take the potion, each vial being struck by lightning and glowing bright silver. She remembered waiting only moments for her two heartbeats to merge into one, and for her first transformation to be complete. None of her friends managed a full transformation that night, but they all knew their forms. Hermione shared the rare trait, like Holly's father, of having the same animagus and patronus forms, an otter, in Hermione's case. Hermione seemed very happy with that form, and Holly supposed that an aquatic animal like that might be a very useful form, able on land, but excellent in water. Ginny too was happy with her form, a goshawk. By the end of the night, she'd mastered the trick of transforming just her eyes, allowing her superior vision in her human form, and giving her disconcertingly orange eyes. Holly had never even thought to try it. But it was Ron who was the proudest of his animagus form. Where Ginny had manifested her form's eyes and Hermione a coat of fur, Ron had manifested a huge lion's mane. He spent the entire night, and most of the next few days, grinning like a madman. January seemed to disappear in a flash of classes, and February seemed frighteningly fast too. Holly played another Quidditch match, winning against a team from Bowsbatons, but the fifth-year dueling competition wasn't until after the second task, to avoid too many boons being handed out, Holly suspected. Then, feeling as if very little time had passed since Christmas to Holly, it was the night before the second task. She and her friends were relaxing in the common room, sitting in their usual seats a good distance from the fire. They were all playing a game of exploding snap when Professor McGonagall walked through the portrait hole and approached them. "Miss Weasley, Miss Granger, may I have a word?" McGonagall, at the exact moment the cards exploded. After the small puff of smoke cleared away, they all looked up. Sure, Professor." "What about?" Ginny asked. "Tournament business, I'm afraid," McGonagall said, and Holly's eyes narrowed. What could McGonagall want with Ginny and Hermione, unless, a very unpleasant thought struck her, she wouldn't be retrieving an object from the merpeople after all. Would the tournament organizers really use hostages? Ginny and Hermione left with McGonagall, and the next morning they were indeed not in Gryffindor Tower. Holly felt her worry grow. Surely they wouldn't be in danger, but what if something went wrong? Spells could fail, and wizards weren't exactly known for being very careful about this sort of thing, she thought. The song didn't mention any consequences for the hostages, but... Holly was shocked out of her worry by Ron, who was waving his hand in front of her face. He was sitting opposite her on the Gryffindor table in the Great Hall. A platter of bacon separated them, and it was tall enough that it was almost hard for Holly to see over. "You awake, Holly?" Ron said. "Yeah, just," she began, but Ron seemed too worked up to listen much. "Look, do you know where Ginny or Hermione is?" "Nobody's seen either of them this morning," Ron said. I'm fairly certain they are currently safely at the bottom of the Black Lake, Holly said. You're kidding me, mate, Ron said, but Holly shook her head. Something had caught her eye, however, and so she didn't respond. Ludo Bagman was at the staff table, and she had to know if her friends were in danger. Holly had never done it without the verbal spell, but the whispers made it easy. She simply caught Bagman's gaze for a moment and pushed. He had some simple defenses, but they were useful only against a surface reading, and only if Bagman knew that she was in his head. As Holly rifled through recent memories about gambling debts and goblins, she knew Bagman had no idea she was in his mind. Then she found it and left his mind. Her friends would be safe after all, even if she failed, no harm would come to them. She felt faintly dirty for reading Bagman's mind, but she had been so worried about Ginny and Hermione. Still, that justification did very little to banish the sense of unease she felt as she walked out to the lake. A huge set of wooden stands had been constructed out on the shore of the lake, along with a wooden platform in the middle with all sorts of bronze pipes running from it. A chair similar to the one Bagman had used at the World Cup, with dozens of omninoculars and a microphone, was visible on the platform too. As she got changed into her swimming costume in the champion's tent, Holly felt confident. She knew what she had to do, the route she needed to take. Her bubblehead charm would hold long enough, and she knew how to cast spells, how to duel, underwater. She strapped her wand holster to her forearm, and the enchanted knife Sirius gave her for Christmas to her ankle, then put on a pair of old socks. As she stepped out of the changing booth, Cedric gave her socks a very odd look. Then all the champions headed out to the shore, where they'd receive their boons and the second task would begin. Chapter 62, Year 4, Chapter 28. Chapter Text. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the second task of the Triwizard Tournament. Now, you may be wondering why our champions are getting ready for a swim in February. A hostage, one dear to each champion, has been taken, and they will have 1 hour to get them back from the bottom of the Black Lake. Failure to do so will have dire consequences for their chances in the third task, Bagman explained through his enchanted microphone. Holly was glad of the warming charm on her swimming costume, and for the skirt, as she stood on the rocky shore of the Black Lake. There was already a cold, howling wind blowing across the lake, and Holly knew the thick grey clouds promised rain sooner or later. People were looking at her a little oddly. Probably, she thought, because of the socks. Each champion will be scored on their speed, their use of magic, and their gallantry. Now, as to their boons, my counterpart in international magical relations is handing those out now. Congratulations to all of you who won a boon for your champion. Mrs. Hull was walking up to each champion, and handing out a few small objects. She handed Holly a wand she immediately recognized as Ginny's, a wrist holster for it, and a small stoppered vial full of pitch-black powder. What's the powder? Holly asked. Peruvian instant darkness powder. Works just as well underwater as above it, Mrs. Hull said, sounding for once interested and animated. Cool, Holly said, then she went back to listening to Bagman. Now, I'm sure you're all wondering if there's going to be much to watch. After all, we can't exactly see beneath the water. Never fear, Professor Dumbledore has very kindly helped us set up a number of omnicular pipes to allow me to keep track of all the action, and I'll be narrating it for you. Champions, you may begin on my countdown. 3, 2, 1, begin. Bagman said, and Holly immediately went to work. She quickly transfigured her socks into flippers, and then cast a verbal bubblehead charm. It seemed like Fleur and Cedric were thinking along the same lines, as both of them had cast the bubblehead charm, but Crumb had chosen a different tactic. He'd done a partial self-transfiguration into a shark. And Potter's displayed impressive mastery of the bubblehead charm for her age, but what's with the shoes? Some kind of muggle device. Bagman said, but that was all Holly heard before she waddled into the water. Walking in the long flippers was awkward, but when she started to swim she knew she'd had the right idea. Cedric and Fleur had both been faster than her to enter the water, but when Holly dived beneath the waves she sped past both of them. Of course, she was pretty fast in general. Holly's vision was fairly limited in the dark, murky water, but she'd scouted out the general route to the merpeople's village before the task. She dived down eager to get away from the other champions, as, after all, there were no rules against stopping another champion from reducing their hostage. She swam just above the tangled forest of dark weeds, tiny silver fish swimming past her in every direction, and headed for the merpeople's village. She had her wand in her hand, ready for trouble, because surely the task wouldn't be as simple as swimming to the village and back again. Something grabbed at her leg, and Holly twisted around in the water. A Grindylow, a sort of small, horned, water demon, was grasping at her ankle, and Holly could see several more of them swimming towards her. She slashed her wand at the creature, and it was blasted backwards by a jet of red light. Her stunning spell had taken care of one, but dozens were now swimming towards her. She waved her wand in a circle around her and conjured a whip of superheated water. Bubbles flew away from it angrily, and she lashed the horde of water demons with it. They cried out in pain, Bubbles escaping from their fanged maws, and swam away from her. Holly used their distraction to swim far enough away that they wouldn't be able to follow her. Holly could see the Merpopple's village now, the shapes of their stone buildings emerging from the murk. There were a half-dozen elaborate stone buildings, Roman in their design, all constructed in a circle. At the center was a large tower that seemed to glow softly from windows at its top floor. It was a huge construction, even bigger than the large buildings surrounding it. There was one last patch of plants before it, and Holly planned to swim a little over it. She had no need to fight off Grindylows once more. A flash of silver beneath the dark plants, and then another. Her eyes narrowed, and Holly thought about what Ginny had done. She concentrated and transformed only her eyes into that of a messenger raven's. Fleur was being mobbed by Grindylows, and she'd lost her grip on her wand. Her hands had turned to talons, and she'd cut a few of them severely, but the blood seeping into the water wasn't purely the brackish blood of the water demons, some of it was the red of Fleur's. Holly knew that the most strategic thing to do was to leave Fleur and continue on, but the Bosbaton's champion looked like she was in real trouble. Holly turned and slashed her wand at the Grindylows. Jets of red light struck them, blasting them backwards and caving in more than a few chests. Against a creature so small, a stunning spell like Holly's could deal serious physical damage. Fleur looked up, and Holly swam closer. She whipped hot water and the remaining Grindylows, and they turned to run. She summoned Fleur's wand and then swam towards her. Holly touched the bubble from her bubblehead charm to Fleur's and handed back her wand. "Are you all right, Fleur?" Holly asked. "Thanks to you, never have I been so scared, not even the dragon," Fleur said, shaking her head. She sounded panicked, but her wounds were only minor. "Do you need help with?" Holly began, but Fleur shook her head. She was already healing her wounds and fixing her swimming costume. "Go on, Holly. I'll give you a little head start," Fleur said, smiling at her. Holly blushed, and she realized that she was very close to a very pretty girl. Deciding that retreat was the wisest option, she nodded and swam off towards the tower. She let her eyes fade back to their natural human green, and shook her head. She needed to keep her mind on the task, not very pretty half-Veela girls winking at her. "Halt, champion!" Holly heard a musical voice say, and she looked down to see a merman floating towards her. He looked nothing like the image Muggles imagined. He had greyish, scaled skin and wild green hair. His eyes seemed to glow a soft yellow, and his mouth was full of sharp teeth the same color. "Once you enter the tower, there can be no retreat. If you wish to forfeit, do so now," the merman said. I understand," Holly said. Her words couldn't travel outside of her bubblehead charm, however, so she nodded as well. The merman swam aside, and Holly saw that there were dozens of them, all watching her approach the large stone tower in the center of their village. There was only one door, and it seemed to crumble to dust as Holly approached. She lit her wand and swam cautiously inside. The second she crossed the doorway, it began to reform, only now behind her, there was nothing but smooth dark stone. Her wand provided the only light as she swam down the stone corridor, which twisted and turned half a dozen ways that couldn't have ever fit into the slim tower Holly had seen without magic. Around the next bend, she came to another door. This one didn't crumble to dust when she approached, and as she tried the handle she realized it was securely locked with no obvious mechanism. Her unlocking charm had no effect, and Holly was no magical lockpick. That had always been Hermione. So Holly swam back and leveled her wand at the door. An explosive curse wouldn't work underwater, and she didn't want to set off a blast in such a confined space. She recalled Dumbledore's lesson on magic and water and put all the power she could into moving the water. The door was blasted off its hinges by the sheer force of the water crashing against it, and Holly swam deeper into the tower. Finally, she was in the core of the tower, and she could see light coming from up above. It seemed like there was a chamber that the water didn't reach, and Holly began to swim upwards. Then the merpeople emerged from little tunnels in the side of the core, carrying huge weighted nets. Holly knew she didn't want to fight them and risk hurting them, so she grabbed the vial of darkness powder and smashed it against the wall. It spread with alarming speed, and the merpeople gave off confused cries as Holly swam up through the darkness and left them behind. She emerged onto a set of stone steps. She pulled herself out of the water, and into what looked like a pocket of air. A little cluster of runs, glowing a soft blue, blew fresh air towards her. The room itself was a wide, circular one. It was made from the same black stone as the tower, but there were a number of couches and armchairs scattered across it. Sitting in them were 3 hostages. Ginny, who smiled broadly when she saw Holly, a young girl who looked very much like Fleur, and Hermione. Ginny. Hermione. Holly called out, as she awkwardly walked over to them in her flippers. She dismissed her bubblehead charm and enjoyed the fresher air for a moment. Holly. Ginny said, leaping up from her chair. She ran across the room towards Holly but jerkily stopped short. A manacle was attached to her left ankle, with a chain leading to the center of the room. Holly walked the rest of the way and kissed her girlfriend. "I was so worried when you weren't at breakfast," Holly said. "We've been down here the whole time. The merpeople even served us breakfast," Ginny said. "How was it?" Holly asked, suddenly curious. "Wet," Ginny said, and Holly laughed. "Do you have a key for that, or?" Holly asked. "Nope. I figure that's part of the challenge," Ginny said. "Did you see Victor, Holly?" Hermione asked. "Don't panic if a half-shark guy comes in here, that's him," Holly said as she examined the lock on the manacle. Thinking that T was probably charmed to resist an unlocking charm, she got the knife Sirius had given her for Christmas out. She pressed the blade into the lock on the manacle, and it almost seemed to flow into the lock. With only a little effort, the lock clicked open. "I guess Sirius did know what he was doing when he got you that for Christmas," Ginny said. "Here's your wand, by the way," Holly said and handed hers to Ginny. "Cho didn't get her wand," Ginny said, sounding pleased. "I think that was your boon," Holly said. Ginny had won the 3rd-year dueling competition, granting Holly a boon in the second task, and if Ginny getting her wand was the boon, then it wasn't over. There was another spiral staircase leading up into what looked like a pool of water, only upside down. Holly could see dim shapes moving beyond, more merpeople with their nets, she thought. "Ginny, get your shield charm ready and hold on when we go up, okay?" Holly asked. She cast the bubblehead charm again, once on her and once on Ginny. All right," Ginny said, and they ascended the spiral staircase slowly. Holly found climbing it in her flippers difficult. "Ready?" Holly asked, holding out her hand to Ginny. She took it, and held on tightly. They climbed into the lake, and Ginny cast her shield charm not a moment too soon. The nets were sent bouncing off, giving Holly enough time to complete her spell. She spoke a few words Dumbledore had taught her, and then she thrust her wand upwards. Water rushed around her, and as she held on to Ginny's hand for dear life they rocketed upwards at great speed. Holly thought she saw a tentacle swipe at them, but they were going far too fast to be hit by it. In less than a minute, they were found out of the water and into the freezing cold air of the lake. They both splashed down back into the water, and Holly cancelled the bubblehead charms as she and Ginny headed towards the shore. And with that spectacular ascent, Miss Potter is our second champion to arrive, only a minute behind Mr. Diggory. "A strong day for Hogwarts, a strong day indeed," Bagman said, and the crowd roared. Chapter 63, Year 4, Chapter 29. Chapter text. Holly quickly made her way back to the champion's tent, drying herself off in one of the little cubicles and getting changed back into her uniform. Madame Pomfrey checked over both Holly and Ginny, before declaring them to not have been too harmed by the task. Then Holly was practically dragged out of the tent by her friends. Ron, the twins, Luna, and more were waiting for her outside the tent. "I can't believe you finished second, Holly. You might really have a chance to win this thing," Ron said. Might have a chance. She's a lock. Odds on her have dropped from 50 to 1 to 2 to 1, she's the current favorite. George said. It's so romantic, Lavender said as the whole group walked back up to the stands. Lucky Hermione. Parvati replied, and Holly rolled her eyes. She was so glad to have succeeded, though, that she let the moment of annoyance pass. She had a great time sitting in the stands, eating pumpkin pasties and every flavor beans whilst Bagman narrated the events below. Holly was startled to find out that he actually was a very good commentator. She could follow what was going on just by his descriptions. She cheered when Fleur conjured a half-dozen squids to cover her escape from the tower and groaned when Crumb was hit with a net. Ginny sat next to her the whole time, letting Holly rest her head on her shoulder. Eventually, both Fleur and Crumb made it out of the water, Fleur arriving before Crumb, and Holly looked on eagerly as all the judges conferred. She'd imagined it was just a matter of who got out with their hostage the quickest, but the judges seemed to be talking about something quite involved. She heard Karkaroff and Maxime shout a little, too. The dust seemed to settle, and the other judges let Bagman go back to his platform. He seemed quite happy with whatever had been decided, Holly though. Ladies and gentlemen, the judges have reached a decision. Thanks to the network of omnioculars placed across the lake, we have been able to observe the events of the task in exquisite detail. Marks have been awarded to our gallant champions out of 50, Bagman announced, pausing to build up the suspense. In fourth place, Victor Crumb. Whilst he displayed impressive mastery of self-transfiguration, he was the last to return. As such, we award him 35 points, Bagman said, and Holly winced as she realized that Karkaroff must have awarded another 10 to Crumb. There was polite clapping from the audience, and booing from the Slytherins at the low score. In third place, Fleur Delacour. She displayed her mastery of the bubblehead charm, and of conjuration. She did, however, have to be rescued from the Grindylows by a fellow champion. We award her 36 points, Bagman said, and Holly thought she saw Karkaroff's face contort in rage. In second place, Holly Potter. Not only did she perform the bubblehead charm far more successfully than could be expected for a witch of her age, but she also showed great mastery of the water manipulation charm. Furthermore, some of us believe that her gallantry in rescuing Miss Delacour was worthy of an increased point award. Accordingly, we have awarded her 45 points, Bagman said, and the entire Hogwarts crowd went wild. The Gryffindors especially seemed to leap to their feet and cheer. Holly was surrounded by noise, and she nearly missed hearing Bagman announce Cedric's score. And in first place, we have Cedric Diggory. He showcased his strong charms skills with the bubblehead and fascination charms, allowing him to proceed through the lake unhindered. Moreover, his disillusionment charm allowed him to retrieve his hostage without incident. In light of that, we have awarded him full marks, 50 points. Bagman said, and Hufflepuff rose to their feet as one to emit a wall of sound even louder than the Gryffindors had for Holly. They cheered and whistles, and someone let off yellow and black fireworks in great numbers. Please give our champions one last round of applause, and be ready for the third task. It'll take place on the 24th of June, champions, you'll be informed about it a month beforehand. Bagman said, and then he left his commentary platform. Holly, you do realize what this means, don't you? Hermione asked her. What? Holly asked, then she started to do the numbers. Cedric had gotten 35 points in the last task, which meant that she and Cedric were actually tied for first. You're tied with Cedric for first. I can't believe you're doing this well, Hermione said. Not supporting Crumb, then? Ron asked. Oh, shut it, Ronald. I'd be happy if Victor won, but I'd also like Holly to win it, Hermione said, blushing a little. It's okay, Hermione. You've been a great help so far, all of you have been, Holly said, and she meant it. She didn't know what she'd have done if she'd been as alone as she had been at the end of her second year. She ignored the whispers telling her that she was never really alone, and went up to the tower to celebrate with her friends. Holly's good mood was rudely interrupted by the next day's copy of the Daily Prophet, which was once again occupied by a large glossy photograph of the task. It seemed a little fuzzy, and Holly thought it might have been taken of an omninocular's lens. The picture itself was of Holly burst into the chamber with the hostages, and kissing Ginny. Holly Potter wins hearts and tasks. Dear readers, This intrepid reporter has had the privilege to view much of the second task in the Triwizard Tournament, and it was spectacular. Our champion rescued the pretty but unskilled Beauxbatons champion, Fleur Delacour, and managed to tie for first place with incredible feats of magic. Some are whispering that Dumbledore himself has been teaching her, and if he is, this reporter would like to thank him on behalf of Magical Britain. As you will be able to read about in the sports section, the second task involved rescuing a hostage. As was reported in Witch Weekly, Holly Potter took a girl to the ball, Virginia Weasley, the same girl she rescued from a dark spirit and a basilisk 2 years ago. Whilst at the time it was reported that they were merely friends, this was an understatement of their relationship. When the girl who lived rescued Virginia, she gave her a rather more than friendly kiss. Has word of this relationship, so untraditional, reached Miss Weasley's parents. This reporter reached out for comment, but my letters have gone unanswered. Of course, one expects girls at Hogwarts to become close, but will this relationship stand the test of time, or will Miss Potter move on to a more adult romance with a boy in a year or two? Of course, she did try to ask Cedric Diggory to the ball and was rejected. Could romance bloom between the two champions, now tied for first place? Read more in this week's Witch Weekly. Holly crumpled up the paper and threw it away, her face red. She could see the Slytherins pointing at her and Ginny and laughing, and she felt awful that she was exposing her girlfriend to this. I'm sorry about this, Holly said to her as they left the breakfast table. Ginny had defense, which was on the way to Holly's transfiguration lesson. It's not your fault, Holly. I knew what I was getting into when I said yes to going with you. And ignore all that rubbish about my parents, yeah. Mum was over the moon when I told her about going with you, though I think she was holding out for you and Ron, Ginny said. Holly spat out her pumpkin juice, and so did Ron. What? Me and Ron? That'd just be, no, Holly said. Yeah, I think Mum went a little off there. No offense, Holly, Ron said, but Holly thought his cheeks were a little red. Did you really ask Cedric? Hermione asked, frowning. Yeah, but it was pretty awful. He was very nice about turning me down, but, Holly said, feeling awkward. She didn't want to talk about her abortive crush on Cedric in front of her girlfriend. I'm not going to be offended, Holly. He's a right handsome bloke, that Cedric, Ginny said, laughing. Well, how did she find out? I can't imagine Cedric told her, Hermione said. That is a little suspicious, Holly said, but by then they were nearly at their classes, so she let it drop. Plenty of people used Skeeter's article to mock Holly or Ginny, mostly Slytherins. Their leader in it seemed to be Pansy Parkinson, who even changed her Potter Sucks badges to say other things when teachers weren't looking. Holly was surprised when Malfoy only half-heartedly took part, and she thought he looked rather tired. He had huge dark circles under his eyes, and he seemed to look more and more depressed when he read his letters from home. Thomas Avery was also keeping away from her, fearful of Moody. The retired Auror's defense lessons had only gotten more intense as the year went on, and Holly was consistently his best student. While the rest of her class were struggling to perform even a basic verbal shield charm, Holly had her silent shield charm down. Moody often asked her to help demonstrate a spell or technique, and Holly found herself enjoying the lessons even when they focused on something she already knew. Helping her classmates learn even basic spells taught her a lot about them, too. Holly had quite the weekend on a day in March, competing in the 5th year dueling competition and playing Ravenclaw right afterwards. Angelina Johnson looked rather nervous, but she promised that even if she was knocked out, at least Ginny would still be able to play on her Firebolt. She had already improved her skills quite a bit from where they had been after the 4th year competition, and Holly found the 5th year competition no harder than the 4th year one, easier, even. None of the foreign students were as good as Emmeline, and she quickly and efficiently worked her way through a parade of OWL students to emerge the winner of the 5th year competition. Cho Chang, who Holly thought might be quite good at it, didn't compete. Ginny did have to take her place against Ravenclaw. Holly was rather worn out by all the dueling, but she managed a quick victory thanks to matching Cho in skill and having a much better broom. Holly cheered especially loudly from the stands as her girlfriend caught the snitch in barely 15 minutes. Near the end of March, Dumbledore summoned Holly for another lesson. She arrived and saw that Dumbledore had put his pensieve on his desk, and had an armchair conjured for her in front of it. "Hello, Professor." What are we doing tonight? Holly asked. It's good to see you, Holly. Tonight, we shall be examining a memory, firstly one of mine, but perhaps others if we have the time. I am still putting this collection together, but as you have advanced in your occlumency far enough to defend your mind against any subtle attack, I thought it prudent to share these with you, Dumbledore said. What are the memories about, Professor? Holly asked. They had to be secret, for Dumbledore to mention her occlumency, but she was at a loss as to what they could be. Secrets from the First War with Voldemort or some grand feat of magic Dumbledore had witnessed. They are about a young man, one you are unfortunately familiar with. It is my hope that, by examining his past, we may find the information useful to us now. I speak, of course, about Tom Riddle. Are you ready, Holly? Dumbledore asked and Holly nodded. They both leant forwards, and Holly felt herself falling into the memory. Chapter 64, Year 4, Chapter 30. Chapter text. Holly staggered backwards, her mind racing. Tom Riddle had been frightening even as a young child, and Holly knew now what Dumbledore must have seen when he first saw her. Their resemblance was uncanny. Oh, there were slight differences, but when she came to Hogwarts they could easily have been mistaken for brothers. That was my first meeting with Tom Riddle. I did not, perhaps, handle it as well as I would now have liked to. I thought him troubled, perhaps, but not possessed of the kind of malice I am now sure he was born with, Dumbledore said. Born with, sir? You think he was what, born evil? Holly asked. The idea gnawed at her, as she remembered Quirrell screaming as she pressed her hands into his face. Evil? No, I think Tom Riddle was born with a sickness of the mind, a total lack of empathy. He might very well have prospered under careful, deliberate care, but he grew up in destitution and abuse. Of course, there are many who grow up in such dark places who do not delight in the suffering of others. So we may call Riddle evil today, but I do not think that fate was inevitable, Dumbledore said, and Holly could hear the pain in his words. It struck her then how old he was, the weary lines in his face and then the wispiness of his white hair. What was all that about his mum and dad? He told me, well, the memory of him, at least, told me that it was his dad who was a Muggle, Holly said. Indeed, Tom Riddle Sr. was an affluent Muggle who lived in the village of Little Hangleton. Mayrup Gaunt, Tom's mother, also lived there. She was a pure-blooded witch, although chronic inbreeding and deprivation had weakened her powers considerably. She retained enough power to control the handsome Tom Riddle, however, Dumbledore said. Control? Holly asked. I am unsure what method she used exactly, but I suspect a mixture of the Imperious Curse and a strong love potion, Dumbledore said, and Holly's eyes widened. She forced him to. Merlin, that's sick, Holly said. That was how such things were done, in Mayrup's experience. It is not an excuse for such behavior, but she grew up in a much darker place than Will's orphanage. But the sad story of the Gaunts requires memories I do not yet have possession of, so we will leave it there for tonight, Dumbledore said. Am I allowed to? Holly began, and Dumbledore nodded. This, you may talk to your friends about. The other memories are of a more secret nature, but Tom is well aware that I remember our first meeting, Dumbledore said, a twinkle in his eye. Holly left his office after that, unsure what to think. She had known that Voldemort had to have been a child once, and yet she had been utterly unprepared to see him as she had. To see the cold cruelty in a child's eyes, and to hear of the tortures he had inflicted upon the other orphans. Wouldn't you have liked to make Dudley afraid? The Whispers asked her. Made him flinch from you, instead of Harry hunting. Made him flinch sooner. Holly ignored them, taking flight as a raven across the grounds. They were always quieter when she was in her animagus form, and she took great joy in flying across the grounds as the last slivers of twilight turned them into a breathtaking mass of long shadows and orange light. She swooped low, flying through the trees and just barely above the grass, then let the wind lift her into the sky. She saw the castle, saw how immense it was. It felt so empty, often. Cold halls and disused classrooms as real a reminder of Voldemort's war as Holly's scar. Wizards did not have the terrible tools of modern, industrial war that Muggles had, and Holly knew that deep down many wizards feared them, but their battles were just as bloody. They merely fought them in hidden homes and secret places instead of muddy battlefields. Being a raven, she thought, was no safety from melancholy. She flew back towards Gryffindor Tower and found a safe place to transform. Then she joined her friends by the fire and was glad of the warmth it offered. "Everything all right?" Ginny asked her, quietly. "Not really," Holly said, leaning against Ginny's shoulder. Her girlfriend was ever so slightly taller than her, now. "Dumbledore showed me when he first met Tom," Holly continued, trusting Ginny to get what she was talking about. "What was he like as a kid?" Ginny asked. "Not all that different from the memory in the diary. I'm not sure what I expected, but something about seeing that look in a little 10-year-old's eyes," Holly said, trailing off. She sat there, leaning against Ginny and looking into the flickering flames, for quite some time. Ron and Hermione had an argument, Ginny played with Holly's hair, and the twins let off a firework at one point. Holly just sat there, feeling drained but not wanting to go to bed. She knew what was waiting for her when she went to sleep. Holly slipped out of the common room after everyone else had gone to bed and the fire had died down. Her cloak on, she walked through the empty stone corridors of the castle without making so much as a single sound. After years of sneaking around Hogwarts, and a life avoiding the Dursleys, Holly was very quiet on her feet. The sound of someone crying broke the silence of the night, and Holly drew her wand. She moved closer, cautious and worried. A classroom door had been left ajar, and she crept through it. To her surprise, the person crying was none other than Draco Malfoy. His eyes were red and puffy, and he looked just as tired and worn out as he had ever since Christmas. Pansy Parkinson was sitting next to him, a hand on his back, and Holly was shocked to see what must have been a look of genuine concern on Parkinson's face. She hadn't thought the pug-nosed girl capable of it. I can't go back there," Pansy Draco said, looking very small suddenly. "It can't be that bad, Draco. I know your father's been a bit harder this year, but your mum," Pansy said, but Draco interrupted her. "It's her too. Something about them's changed, Pansy. They keep talking about transferring me to Durmstrang, or even to one of the American schools." "They're afraid," Draco said. "Afraid of what?" "It's not like our families have anything to fear from the Dark Lord," Pansy said. "I don't know. They keep talking to that house elf, whispering when they think I can't hear them," Draco said. Holly was being very, very quiet as she listened in on Draco and Pansy's conversation. "It's probably just boring stuff, Draco. Or maybe they've been contacted. Either way, there's not much you can really do about it, is there? I've been thinking about running away. I have enough money at hand that I could get out of Europe before they noticed," Draco said, and Holly's eyes went wide. What on earth could frighten Malfoy that badly? "Don't be stupid, Draco. Your parents would find you in a week or two, better to just tough it out until 7th year, and then you can get out of that manor. We could get somewhere nice, just the two of us," Pansy said, and then she kissed him rather passionately. Holly took that as her cue to leave. Holly found most of the 6th years to be no greater challenge than the 5th years as duelists that weekend. Some of them could do nonverbal spells, but she could cast faster, stronger, and more accurate spells than them. She sent one flying off the platform and bound another in conjured ropes merely by clicking her fingers together. Then, as seemed inevitable, she faced Cedric in the final duel for the 6th year competition. A hush came over the stands as he and Holly took their positions on the dueling platform, 10 paces apart from one another. "I think this is almost as scary as facing you on the Quidditch pitch," Cedric said, jovially. "Well, at least it'll be over quicker one way or another," Holly replied. She'd dueled Cedric once before, when he had assisted Remus in his end-of-year exam in Holly's 3rd year at Hogwarts. She knew he was very good, probably better than her at the time, but she had gotten much better since then. He'd probably been training hard too, however, because the champions were almost always directly pitted against one another in the final task. She'd need an edge to beat him, and she thought she had won. She had checked the formal rules, and it was technically not against them so long as she didn't start before Flitwick announced the start of the duel. Cedric, she knew from a very careful probe yesterday, had no obvious knowledge of occlumency. "And we have 2 champions facing off for the first time. Holly Potter, who's fought her way up from the 4th year competition to compete for the 6th year title, faces Cedric Diggory. This should be a hell of a duel, folks. Can Diggory face down the girl who lived They are currently tied for first place in the tournament, so the boons from these last few competitions should be crucial, Lee Jordan said from his commentary box. Slytherin and one of the Durmstrang teams were due to play Quidditch after the dueling competition. 3, 2, 1, start. Flitwick said, and then both Holly and Cedric leapt into action. He tried for a fast disarming charm, but Holly had an unverbal shield up in time. She'd angled her wand just so that Cedric's disarming charm was reflected back towards him, and he had to waste precious seconds shielding himself. She had no intention of going on the offensive until she had her advantage in place. Using the brief moment her shield charm had given her, Holly reached out. Not with her arms, but with her mind, until she felt the very edge of Cedric's. She touched only the very surface thoughts in his head, the stuff of momentary instinct. When he cast his stunning spell next, she knew before he did, consciously, at least, that he would follow it up with a blasting hex. Holly was able to nimbly step aside from almost all of Cedric's spells, not needing to take the time to shield herself unless she absolutely couldn't dodge. She could start moving before Cedric even knew what spell he'd be casting next at anything beyond an instinctual level. It was much like what she'd been able to do by reading Emmeline's pre-practiced spell patterns, but with every spell Cedric cast. Without having to shield herself, Holly went on a barrage of offensive spells. She sent stunning spells, disarming charms, blasting hexes, and bodybind curses flying towards Cedric as fast she could cast. He could defend himself against them, but her spell had such power behind them, even the simple dueling spells like her stunning and disarming spells, that his shield charms began to crack ominously. Then her blasting hex shattered Cedric's shield charm entirely with a sound like a sledgehammer going through glass, and it sent him flying backwards. Holly's follow-up disarming charm seemed almost insult to injury, but she had cast it before she'd seen the impact of her blasting hex. She drew her mind back into her own head and helped Cedric up. "Someday you'll need to tell me how you got that good," Holly, Cedric said as the Gryffindors in the crowd cheered. Holly saw her friends waving banners from the red and gold section of the stands. "Someday. Tell you what, if you still haven't worked it out after the tournament is over, I'll teach you," Holly said, smiling. "It's a deal," Cedric said, and he waved to the crowd to show he wasn't hurt. Chapter 65, Year 4, Chapter 31. Chapter text. "That was amazing, Holly. How did you do it? I've never seen someone just dodge every spell like that," Ron said as they walked back to the castle. It was almost like you could see what Cedric was going to cast before he cast it. "I've heard some seers can do that, you know," Ginny said, her eyes wide. "Or before he thought it," Hermione said, and from the way she looked at her, Holly knew Hermione at least had worked out how Holly had done it. "Hermione's got it right. I used Legilimency on Cedric," Holly said. "What, you read his mind?" "That's a little off, mate," Ron said. "I didn't go looking for his secrets or anything. There's a thing you can do where you just read instinct without touching conscious thought. Lets you know what spell they are going to cast before they do," Holly explained. "Wicked. I can see why Dumbledore taught you all this mind stuff," then Ginny said. "Is that allowed under the rules?" Hermione asked. "Yeah, so long as I start after Flitwick's called start," Holly said. "Maybe I need to learn that occlumency stuff," Ron muttered, and Holly frowned as she felt the breeze blow across the grounds. Not as cold as it had been, she thought. Holly's classes were getting harder and harder as the school year hurtled towards the end, but she could only pay so much attention to them. She was by now incredibly busy with training for the tournament. She still managed to get Quidditch practice in, but only just. It was a good thing Fleur and Krum, who were in their final year of schooling, didn't need to sit their exams, Holly thought. She knew she couldn't have passed a Newt this year, let alone all of the ones she wanted to take. It was only with the help of her friends that she was able to, just barely, maintain her grades in her fourth-year classes. It was a great relief when she played Gryffindor's final Quidditch match of the season. Crushing Slytherin in front of the entire school was just as satisfying as she remembered it being, although she didn't think Draco had really been trying all that hard. His flying had been off for the whole match, and he seemed to be even more tired than her, judging by his reaction speed. Holly had wondered why the Quidditch season had ended before the dueling competition, but as she saw the large banners shroud the pitch from view she realized that it was needed for something else. That was almost certainly the third task, which probably made sense. Why build another stadium if you already had one, after all? She was half tempted to go take a look under her cloak, but if she'd have a month's warning anyway, cheating seemed like bad form. All the teachers were helping her and Cedric, now. Of course, they weren't officially helping the two Hogwarts champions, but all the extra dueling practice Flitwick and Moody gave Holly, and she was sure Cedric as well, weren't on the standard curriculum. Neither was the very specific selection of interesting critters Hagrid showed Holly, explaining how to get past or disable them. One night, she was sitting by the fire in the common room as it got low, most of her housemates long since having gone to bed. She took out her mirror and whispered Sirius's name into it. "What are you doing up at this time?" he asked, slurring his words just slightly. Holly smiled ruefully. She'd swear she could smell the alcohol on his breath over the mirror. "I see you've been having fun," Holly said. "I'm an adult." "We're allowed to go get drunk once in a while," Sirius said, sticking out his tongue at her. "Seriously though, are you alright?" "Your letters have been," he continued. I'm not great, but I'll last until the tournament is over. I'm just tired, that's all. At least this whole plot to kill me via the tournament thing didn't work out for whoever was behind it," Holly said. "Don't let your guard down, Holly. Whoever tampered with the goblet still has access to the school, and if they don't succeed with the third task," Sirius said. I know. Really, I've been keeping an eye on all the suspects we had with the map, but none of them ever seem to do anything suspicious. Madame Dupont just teaches the Bosbaton students and all Karkaroff does is hang around with Snape," Holly said. "Hanging around with Snape is suspicious. Two former Death Eaters. I've listened in on them a few times. Karkaroff is just trying to poach Snape for Durmstrang." "Merlin knows why he'd want him," Holly said, interrupting Sirius. "As greasy and annoying as Snape is, he does know a thing or two about potions. He'd fit in with all the pureblood supremacists over there too," Sirius said. They talked for a little while longer, and Holly felt a little better. Her problems weren't all magically gone, but having someone like Sirius to talk to helped. She dreamed of the chamber again that night, and of the terrible fire at the World Cup. In the last week of May, Holly was told to head down to the Quidditch pitch. The third task would, finally, be revealed to the champions. She found herself standing outside the pitch, still covered by a large floating cloth drape, with the other champions. Night had already fallen, and whilst it was no longer the depth of winter, her breath still frosted in the cold climate of Hogwarts. "Judging by the size of that cover, whatever arena they are building in there must be bloody large," Cedric said. "I wonder where Mr. Bagman is. He has always been so eager to show off his constructions before," Fleur said. As she spoke, a number of figures emerged from around a bend in the pitch. Bagman was there, but also a number of teachers, Moody, Karkaroff, and Madame Dupont. "Ah, all here. Excellent. Well, if you'd join your teachers and follow me," Bagman said, and all the champions followed him into the stands. They climbed the steps in relative silence until they emerged into the teacher's box. Without waiting for anyone to speak, Bagman waved his wand and all at once the huge cloth drapes flew away from the pitch. The normal oval of bright green grass had been completely transformed. In its place was a huge construction that seemed to be mostly made from hedgerows and overgrown stone. It was like a maze, but there were multiple levels, each smaller in area than the previous one. Odd structures were sticking out of the hedges, and there at the top was a large open rotunda. It had huge Roman columns, and at its center was a marble plinth that seemed to be at exactly the eye level of the general seating. Feast your eyes on one of the most difficult tasks ever designed for this tournament, a maze of such devilish construction. Can you believe old Barty wanted only one level? Said there wasn't a budget for anything more. Well, we've had some very helpful private donations and can give you the full experience. Monsters, traps, the maze, all of them will be as fiendish as we could make them. Well, any questions? Bagman said. I assume we have to get to the top? Holly asked. Quite right you are, my dear. That's why I asked for a representative from each school to come as well, you know. I assume the three of you can handle getting the actual cup to that top plinth there on the day. Good, Bagman said. I am sure it will be no trouble at all, Monsieur Bagman, Madame Dupont said with a smile. She was much younger than the other two teachers here, being perhaps 30, and strikingly handsome. Holly tried not to think about how good-looking the Bosbaton's defense professor was. HMPH. I doubt there is much you two could do to cheat with it, so I shall leave it to you. Victor, with Mikhailov said. Crumb followed him, and Holly thought he looked rather uncomfortable. As everyone walked back to the castle, Holly lagged a little behind Cedric and Moody. She was surprised when she saw Madame Dupont approach her, but she smiled as the French professor walked alongside her. I wanted to tell you how impressive I found your dueling, Mademoiselle Potter. Not many at your age could claim such mastery of the mind arts, Dupont said, smiling back at Holly. Oh, you noticed that? Thank you, Madame Dupont. Holly said, blushing a little. I did. Holly, may I call you Holly? I would like to ask you to think about your future employment. I myself am only a teacher at Bosbaton's part-time, you know. My real job, and certainly the one which makes me almost all my gold, is as a troubleshooter for hire, of sorts. I have a few colleagues, but such a talented witch as yourself would be more than welcome amongst us, Dupont said, and Holly blinked. She really hadn't been expecting a job offer. I'll keep that in mind, thanks, Holly said. I'm sure you will. The band can offer gold the likes of which you'll never see in this dreary little country, and I'm sure you'll appreciate the, your being a member of such an organization can have. If you have no other plans this summer, perhaps you would like to come and... What was the word? Intern with us, I think is the phrase. Dupont said, and Holly blinked. Yeah, I'll think about it, Holly said, and then she managed to extract herself from the very odd conversation. She'd never heard of this band Dupont was trying to recruit her for, but they sounded a little shady to Holly. The idea did appeal to her, though. Traveling to exotic locations and getting into adventures for a great load of gold sounded better than some boring ministry job to her. As she returned to the common room, her friends rushed towards her. What is it then, the task? Ron asked. They've built some insane multi-story maze out on the Quidditch pitch. Bagman said there'd be monsters and stuff, and I think the other champions will be in there at the same time, Holly said. Sounds wicked. At least we won't have to watch it by listening to Bagman again, Ginny said. Honestly, his narration wasn't that bad. I think there are some spells that might help with the maze portion, Holly. And of course, we can help you practice dueling and dealing with magical traps, Hermione said. That'd be great, Hermione. Although there is something else, Holly said, unsure how to phrase it. What, like a secret fourth task or something? Ron asked. No, nothing like that. Madame Dupont, you know, one of the defense teachers from Bosbaton's who's here to teach the students at Hogwarts. She offered me a job, Holly said. What, she wants you to go teach at Bosbaton's? Ginny asked. No, apparently she works for something called the Band. Oh, I've heard of them. They sound really powerful from what I've read, but also like they didn't much care for what they were doing beyond that they got paid, Hermione said. They did sound a little shady, the way she described them, Holly said. She must have been really impressed by you this year to offer it, though. There are less than 10 known members, and they are all supposed to be really powerful witches and wizards, Hermione said. Anyway, let's get back to the tournament, yeah. Ginny said, and Holly was a little surprised to hear her girlfriend so irritated. Yeah, so here's how I think the monsters will work, Holly began, as she and her friends sat down for the first of many long planning sessions. They had a month to get Holly ready for the third task, and she was determined to win it. Chapter 66, Year 4, Chapter 32. Chapter Text. And what will I be learning tonight, Professor? Holly asked Dumbledore. He had once more asked her to his office for a practical lesson, and as usual, Holly had no idea what it would be about. Oh, a bit of this and that, Dumbledore said, smiling a little as he held out an arm. She took it, and then Holly felt the unpleasant squeezing sensation of apparition. It felt like she was the last bit of toothpaste in the tube, being squeezed out by a particularly frugal person. The sensation only lasted for the briefest of moments, however, and then she emerged onto a dark hilltop. It was covered in jagged stones, and Holly could hear waves lapping against rock somewhere nearby. They must be near the coast, and judging by the temperature they had gone all the way to England. Where are we, Professor? Holly asked. She could see some distant lights, a small town or a large village, perhaps, but there didn't seem to be much of interest on this rocky hill or nearby. Oh, just a place I remembered from a misspent youth. An irresponsible young wizard once tested out a powerful curse here and rather completely killed off much of the plant life. So, with nothing that might upset anyone if it was destroyed for quite a distance, we may practice magic here without concern, Dumbledore said, his eyes twinkling in the moonlight. Didn't you pop out of the ground fully formed with a white beard? Holly asked. She smelled something on the air, a faint scent of burnt ozone that seemed to permeate everything, the air, the rocks, the dry, crumbly soil. On the contrary, I was rather handsomely red-headed for many years. Tonight, Holly, we shall be learning about the air and the earth, about the magic inherent in the world, and how to use it to one's own advantage, Dumbledore said, withdrawing his long, odd-looking wand. Holly had never seen an Ollivander wand quite like it, and she often found herself drawn to it. Something about it seemed almost familiar to her. Like how? I thought you needed big runestones and arithmetic calculations and all that to tap a liline. Holly asked. One needs such precise and stabilizing elements to set up the Portkey network or anchor powerful wards. But if you merely wish to access that wild and uncontrolled power, then all you need is your wand, or some other suitable focus, such as an animagus potion, Dumbledore said, and Holly looked away for a moment. Oh, cool. Wouldn't know about using one of those, but cool, Holly said, awkwardly. Of course. But the danger of an animagus transformation is in the wild nature of the natural magic used to induce such a permanent change to one's own magic. So it is with all manipulation of lilines and natural magic, Dumbledore explained. Dumbledore taught Holly a number of spells, curses to call down lightning from the sky, spells to cause the earth to rupture and shake, charms to find ways through woods with gusts of wind, and techniques to understand the flow of magic. It was, much like the animagus transformation, very different from the sort of magic Holly had learned in her classes at Hogwarts. Whereas the standard wand-based magic she was familiar with used power channeled through the witch and then the wand, this sort of magic manipulated power that was already there. She could draw down bolts of lightning from the sky because there was magic in the air that wanted to be unleashed as wind or rain or lighting. She could examine wards and traps with gusts of magical wind because it already carried power with it. If this sort of magic is so powerful, why do wizards use wands and their own magic? Holly asked. Wands were invented by the Romans, as you've heard from Professor Bean several times, no doubt, but the powerful modern wands we use today are much more recent. Roman wands lacked the strengthening runes modern wands have, and so they had in almost every case much weaker cores than any wand you'd find for sale in Ollivanders. The synthesis of Norse runes, magical woodworking, and potion-making required to create a wand as powerful as yours only predates the start of secrecy by 50 years or so, Dumbledore explained, and Holly blinked. Really? So people used, ambient magic a lot more before that? Holly asked. They did. Indeed, it is thought the earliest witches and wizards used this type of magic essentially exclusively. The unfiltered manipulation of natural magic is what most are referring to with whispers of powerful ancient magic. As powerful as it is, though, it is severely limited. It requires sufficient natural magic in the palace you wish to cast in, carries much greater risk than wand magic, and is usually not nearly as rapid as wand magic. It can, however, come in useful from time to time, Dumbledore said. Holly was very glad to be exempt from end-of-year exams, because whilst her classmates were spending the last few weeks before the exams feverishly studying, she was able to prepare for the third task and get enough sleep. She wasn't skipping class or anything, but the homework had gradually fallen away and been replaced with revision. Her friends could only help her sporadically as the exam season got closer and closer, but Holly had learned well how to study magic on her own if she really needed to. She wasn't as fanatical as she'd been in her second year, but the situation wasn't nearly as serious, as full of traps, monsters and other champions as the maze was sure to be. It had been nothing next to confronting the heir of Slytherin and his basilisk. I can't believe we have to do crystal ball reading again this year, Ron said, one evening in the common room. Well, that's what happens when you stick with divination, Hermione said. Don't knock it, Hermione. Just because it's the one subject you're rubbish at, Ron said. I didn't have an inner eye, or whatever. What's your excuse for your predictions not coming true? Plenty of my predictions come true, Ron said, although he looked a little uncomfortable. Oh yeah? Like what? Ginny said, butting into the argument. My palm, Ron began, but then he coughed violently, almost like he was choking. His eyes rolled back, and Holly rushed over to try and help him. Then his eyes returned with a fierce intensity, and he spoke in a low voice. At the end, to the left, Ron said, and it sounded as if there were a dozen Rons, all speaking in harmony. Then he seemed to deflate, almost, and Ron coughed again. What the fuck was that? Holly said, and Hermione was so shocked she didn't even think to critique Holly's language. What do you mean? I must have swallowed something badly. It was just a little cough, Ron said, looking very confused. I think that was a real prophecy, Holly said, her eyes wide. But what could it mean? At the end, to the left, Hermione asked. Maybe it's about the maze, Ginny asked. I still don't know what you're talking about, Ron said. In the end, nobody knew quite what to make of Ron's prophecy, if he had actually made one. Holly told Dumbledore about it, but he had no more insight into it than she or Hermione had been able to find. Holly flew over the maze in her raven form at night several times, and there was no left turn to the top level, there were simply a pair of marble staircases leading up to it. The multi-layered construction meant she couldn't memorize much of the route, but she did get a good look at several of the traps being installed. Her friends were all progressing well with their own transformations, all of them had managed to get the full transformation down, and Ginny sometimes joined Holly on her nighttime flights. Holly had also learned how to transform only her eyes, allowing her to see as well as she could in her raven form without fully transforming. They were rather disturbing to look at, though at least they were the right size. The weekend before the third task, the final dueling competition was held in the Great Hall. Holly felt like she had wandered into the wrong class as she joined the other competitors in the little section. Everyone else there towered over her, and plenty of the boys had facial hair and mustaches. Some of them were even not laughably patchy. They all looked at Holly with a surprising amount of respect. Nobody here seemed inclined to dismiss her based on her age. Perhaps it was her fame, or that they knew just how good she'd have to be to make it here from the fourth-year competition. Many of the people she'd faced today had jobs lined up as Aurors or hit wizards, and several of them were already competing on the professional circuit. My coach showed me an omnicular recording of your duel with Diggory. Very impressive, especially for your age, one of the boys from Beauxbatons said to Holly. Fleur and Krum were also here, though Krum looked a little uncomfortable. Holly wasn't sure if he was as good as everyone else here, or if he'd thought he'd had to attend due to being a champion. Fleur was rumored to be very fierce, and Holly was hoping not to have to face off against her. Not as much as she was hoping not to encounter Thomas Avery, who also here, though she was sure she could win that duel. Holly had to hand in a special permission slip to attend this final competition because the rules about spell use were much looser than the rest of the competitions. Sirius had signed it, of course, but he had told her to be careful. Holly wasn't all that worried. Loose restrictions were good for her because she'd wager she knew more curses than most of these 7th years. Some of them were still too dangerous for a sporting duel, but she stood a real chance at being able to smash down shield charms in a reasonable time frame under these rules. The open question was how many of them were capable of occlumency. It was a rare art, but Holly knew that Aurors at least were trained in it. Maybe some of the 7th years had done a little extracurricular preparation, though she'd be surprised if many of them knew it. Legilimency, especially as powerful as hers, was rarer still. Her first duel was against a boy from Durmstrang, Frederick Dahlberg. He had a thick beard and greasy hair that was pulled back and tied up with a ribbon, a common hairstyle amongst wizards, and Holly recognized his stance. A Swedish classicist, she thought. Not a common style these days, and one mostly passed down from master to apprentice. Holly cast first, her disarming spell flying forwards only moments after Flitwick called the duel to start. Frederick deflected it easily, but that was enough for Holly. She followed it up by whipping lightning across his weak, nonverbal shield. It cracked and splintered, and he was forced to spend yet more time recasting it, time Holly spent extending her mind. She found no mental defenses, and just as easily as she had with Cedric she was able to listen to Frederick's instincts. She didn't need to shield herself or try to anticipate what spell he might cast next, Holly knew what he was going to cast before he did. Her blasting curses slammed into his shield charms, and the few offensive spells he did cast were unable to buy him any time. Holly simply pushed him, attacking and attacking until eventually, perhaps a minute later, she broke his shields with a whip of bright blue-white lightning and disarmed him before he could cast another spell. Frederick was very gracious in defeat, and Holly handed him back his wand with a smile. Then she returned to the waiting area, and felt her blood run cold as the next round came up. She was to face Thomas Avery in the second round, the boy whose father she had killed with his own curse during the attack on the Quidditch World Cup. Chapter 67, Year 4, Chapter 33. Chapter Text. Holly walked back up to the platform, trying not to remember how Avery's father had screamed. How he'd died in agony, his own dark curse devouring him because had ordered it to. She felt her hand shake a little, and she felt like screaming. Why now, she despaired, of all times. Then she stood facing Avery, and her hand stilled. Her heart beat faster, and she felt something touch her mind. A brief, subtle presence. Avery was hoping to do the same thing to her that she had done to Frederick and Cedric. His legilimency was inelegant and amateurish, so she thought that he had little experience with it. Someone must have taught him this only recently. Attempting to use it before the duel had started was a breach of the rules, but Holly was more interested in who had taught it to Avery. She carefully misdirected his probe, emptying her mind and leading him into false trails. Then she followed the probe back, slipping into Avery's mind and through his mediocre occlumency. She did not restrain herself to merely his instincts, instead rifling through his memories. She dashed through hazy half-recalled study sessions, waded through tears shed for his father, and avoided anything that looked like a broom cupboard until she found it. Holly couldn't see faces, only a shadowy collection of figures. Avery knelt, his arm burning with pain, and something touched his mind. Something dark and something powerful. Something that was achingly familiar, as if Holly had known it all her life. She knew his task, and she felt sick. He was being used as a kamikaze, an assassin who could succeed because he would not try to escape. He was an angry child, grieving for the loss of a strict but much-loved father, who had been turned into a weapon aimed at her. Flitwick called for the duel to start, and Holly knew she had only one chance to save Avery from at least life in Azkaban. She fed him a false instinct, and she knew his own. She jabbed her wand forward, casting the fastest spell she knew, the disarming charm. She'd fooled Avery into thinking she was going to shield as an opening, and so he had jumped straight to the killing blow. Before he could begin the incantation, he went tumbling backwards and Holly plucked his wand out of the air. People in the stands along the sides of the hall stood and cheered at such a quick and dramatic victory, but Holly ignored them. She walked over to Avery, who seemed to have hurt his leg when he landed, and knelt down next to him. "I know what you wanted to do, Avery. It won't bring your father back, and if you're lucky you'd have been spending your days in Azkaban. Moody might just have splattered you across the platform. You get one chance, from me. You try that again, and it won't be a disarming charm," Holly whispered to him, her voice calm and measured. She did not sound angry, nor disquieted. Her hand was still. He nodded, and Holly helped him up. She looked at him and handed him back his wand. He took it, gingerly, and Holly felt something as she handed it back. Some surge of recognition from the wand, acknowledging the true stakes of the duel and her decision to return it. Dumbledore looked at her from the staff table, and she saw pride in his sparkling blue eyes. She also caught Moody sliding his wand back into his sleeve, and shook her head ruefully. Of course there was a backup plan. Moody took Avery, clearly shaken and blank-faced, out of the hall. With Avery defeated, Holly was able to watch the other duels with far less stress. She marveled at how good some of the Seventh Years really were, and she knew that she had done something incredible just by reaching this point. She had so many advantages, teachers who'd taken time for just her, friends willing to help, but she had only half the magical education of her opponents here, and they were mostly rich purebloods with tutors to spare. She thought about what Hagrid had told her, about why he wanted her to win. She'd thought about entering the tournament at the start of the year mostly just because it sounded exciting. But now she had a reason to win it, and, she thought, when the chips were down and it really mattered, that was when she did her best. Holly didn't end up facing Krum. He was knocked out in the third round, and Holly defeated her opponent there with little trouble. As good as many of the duelists here were, only Avery had possessed even basic occlumency, and without it, there was little they could really do. It was almost impossible to defeat someone who knew what you were going to cast before you did. The last duel of the entire competition came down to Holly and Fleur, who had used her nearly supernatural speed and reflexes to outcast most of her opponents. As they took their positions, Holly narrowed her eyes. Fleur was fast, but she didn't think she was that fast. She, like Holly, was probably using some kind of magic to read her opponent's moves. Flitwick called start, and neither of them moved. They battled, yes, but not in the physical world. Their respective mental probes raced through fake pathways and cleverly disguised traps. Holly felt Fleur's allure, that supernatural desire to please her, ramp up drastically. Her occlumency protected her, as it did from Fleur's surprisingly strong legilmency. Neither of them could gain an upper hand in their battle of wills, and so almost by mutual agreement they retreated to their own minds. People in the crowd seemed to be wondering what was going on, wondering why the two champions were merely standing ready and not casting. "Your will is most admirable, Mademoiselle Potter," Fleur said. "As is your own, Fleur." "The old-fashioned way, then?" Holly asked, and she raised her wand. They cast their first spells then, and fought in the much more traditional fence of hex and shield. Blasting hexes smashes across shimmering fields of energy, stunning spells slammed into one another in midair, and Holly whipped lighting at Fleur's incredibly strong shield charms. It was a whirlwind of light and noise, exactly the kind of show the crowd was waiting for. Without access to the other's mind, both of them could dodge far fewer spells and had to instead rely on shield charms much more. Fleur's shield charms were better than Holly's, but Holly was faster and more accurate when it came to casting spells. Fleur sent flocks of conjured birds to attack Holly, but she burnt them all to a crisp with a single wave of her wand and conjured hands from the surface of the platform to try to drag Fleur down. The nimble Partvila girl evaded the grasping hands, trusted in her shield charm for a moment, and blasted the hands apart with a blasting hex. Holly tried using bright flashes of light and loud sounds to disguise her attacks, but Fleur would simply retreat behind her shields, and with the spells at her disposal for this duel Holly couldn't break them fast enough. Then, it happened. Holly's shield broke, and Fleur moved quickly to take advantage of it. Holly had the briefest moment to decide what to do, and she did not cast another shield. That way only left a grinding battle of attrition she was unsure she'd win. Instead, even as Fleur moved through the motions of a stunning spell, so did Holly. They both cast at almost the exact same time, and Holly threw herself to the side. She woke up on the floor of the platform and heard Flitwick awaken someone else. She got to her feet, unsteadily, and looked around. Fleur was also picking herself up off the floor, and Holly's mind raced at the implications. Had she lost? Had she won? She didn't know. "Well, I have never seen anything like it, a draw by a double knockout. Miss Delacour, Miss Potter, do either of you demand a continuation?" Flitwick asked, and Holly half recalled the rules on draws. She looked at Fleur, and they both shook their heads. "I'm happy to leave it at a draw," Professor Holly said. "As am I. We shall let the third task determine the victor, no?" Fleur said, and Holly nodded. They shook hands, and Holly was very surprised when Fleur hugged her. "That was amazing, Holly," Ginny said, and Holly took her girlfriend's hand in her own as they walked out onto the grounds with their friends to enjoy the sun a little. It really was a rare beautiful day, blue skies, a pleasant temperature and an even more pleasant breeze. Holly spent the time everyone else was taking exams getting ready for the third task, and catching up on some much-needed rest. She kept up her flights over the maze at night, and she saw new creatures being delivered and traps being installed. Some of Hagrid's blast-ended scroots were visible from the air, and there were surely more threats that were covered by the upper levels of the maze. She didn't see Avery again, after the duel. He was absent from dinner that night, and when she checked the Mordor's map, he was in Dumbledore's office. He stepped into the fireplace and didn't come back. On the morning of the third task, Holly ate her breakfast with surprising energy. Whatever happened, after today the tournament would be over. She wanted to win, more than she had ever thought possible back when she'd been entered, but she felt calm as she finished the last of her bacon. She saw McGonagall walking towards her out of the corner of her eye, and turned to face the professor. "Potter, the champions are congregating in the chamber of the hall after breakfast," McGonagall said. "Already?" Holly asked, surprised. "The champions' families are invited to watch the task." "This is just a chance for you to greet them," McGonagall said, and Holly nodded. She hoped Remus had come as well as Sirius. He and her godfather might not have been married, but she knew how much they cared for one another. She finished the last bit of egg on her plate, sculled the rest of her pumpkin juice, and headed up to the chamber behind the Great Hall. The hidden door swung open as she approached, and she saw that the other champions were already inside. Fleur was talking to her sister, a little girl who looked just like her, whilst her silver-haired parents watched on. Krum was next to a gruff man and a dark-haired woman, and he was speaking to them in rapid Bulgarian. Cedric was sitting next to his father in a pair of worn-looking armchairs. Sirius and Remus were standing by the entrance, and Holly smiled as she saw them. "Sirius, you." "Remus," Holly said, and she hugged Sirius tightly, and then Remus more gently. He looked a little worn out, but he still smiled as she hugged him. "It's good to see you both," Holly said, smiling widely. "It's good to see you too, kid. You've grown since the last time I saw you in person," Sirius said. "We listened to the other tasks on the Wizarding Wireless, but I'm glad we can be here this time," Remus said, and Holly nodded. "The maze they've built looks wicked. It's got multiple levels and all sorts of stuff," Holly said. "I know, Bagman showed us all around it while you were having breakfast." "Merlin, is he annoying?" "What an ass," Sirius said, and Holly laughed. "He's awful. Not a bad commentator, though," Holly said. They then left the small chamber and walked onto the grounds, enjoying the clear skies and relatively warm weather. Holly talked about nothing all that serious, but she still felt glad to talk to her godfather. Her friends wandered over after about an hour, and she smiled as they did. "So this is the infamous girlfriend. She doesn't look like she's leading you down a path of wickedness," Sirius said, laughing, as Ginny approached. "Shut it, you overgrown dog. Or I'll show you just how wicked I am," Ginny said, and that made Holly laugh too. Dobby brought them a picnic basket and they had lunch outside, with Holly inviting her elf friend to sit with them. He took some convincing, but he did it in the end. The day passed all too quickly, however, and soon enough Holly was walking down to the pitch after the evening feast. The path was lined with burning torches, and the champions were walking down before the rest of the school. It gave the procession an eerie affair, and Holly could swear she'd seen Sirius in his dog form watching from the forest's edges, but he was standing right next to her, the whole time. Sirius and Remus wished her luck, and then Holly was alone with the other champions in front of the maze whilst the stands above them filled with people. The third task was about to begin. Chapter 68, Year 4, Chapter 34. Chapter Text. Holly only listened idly as McGonagall explained how to call for help or give up, her heart beating loudly in her chest. The crowd was already murmuring, the sound of people climbing the wooden stairs up to the stands like 100 huge drumbeats. She could tell the other champions were just as nervous as her, and they were all looking at the same thing, the distant blue glow of the Triwizard Cup from its palace atop the pyramidal maze. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the third and final task of the Triwizard Tournament. Now, a reminder of the current standings: Miss Potter and Mr. Diggory of Hogwarts are tied at 85 points each. Miss Delacour of Beauxbatons is at 76 points, and then Mr. Krum of Durmstrang at 75 points. A very close set of scores. In a moment, Miss Potter and Mr. Diggory will enter the maze, and then 9 minutes later, so will Miss Delacour. 1 minute after that, Mr. Krum will follow," Bagman said, sitting in the commentator's box. A number of teachers from the 3 competing schools walked out then, carrying a variety of odd objects. Madame Hooch was pushing along a floating bludger, Madame Dupont was carrying a number of small pouches and vials, and more. They each approached the champions and started to hand out their boons. Holly got a bludger that would bash through obstacles for her from Madame Hooch for Gryffindor's victory in the Intercool Quidditch tournament, as well as a vial of Peruvian instant darkness powder and a set of glasses that could see in the dark from Madame Dupont. Fleur was also given a pair of the glasses, though Holly noticed her own pair were actually also prescription glasses, and, more importantly, the right prescription. "And the boons have been handed out?" You've all aided your champions this year, and they'll be going into the task with the fruits of your efforts. Miss Potter, Mr. Diggory, to the entrance, Bagman said, and Holly walked up to the entrance of the maze. It was lit only by the moon, and the distant fires lighting the stands. Holly put the glasses she'd won in the dueling competition on, and marveled at how well she could see. She could have got much the same effect with her partial animagus transformation, but it was good not to have to do that in front of the entire school. If she had been a registered animagus, the whole task would have been over fairly quickly, although someone would probably have added defenses against birds, she thought. Cedric walked next to her, and they stood at the entrance to the maze. The hedgerows were thick and dark, and Holly could see that it soon split into two paths, one to the right, and one to the left. Which one do you want, Holly? Right or left? Cedric asked her. Left, Holly said, remembering her overflights of the maze. Cedric's eyes narrowed a little, but he nodded. And, start! Bagman shouted, just as a set of magical fireworks went off. They exploded loudly and showered the entire stadium in multicolored sparks, but the noise was soon drowned out by the roar of the crowd. Holly rushed forward, drawing her wand as she did so, and saw Cedric rush down the right path. She turned to the left and remembered what she'd seen of the way deeper into the maze from her overflight. She knew about the first section, before the next level cut off the view from above, and luckily where the entrance to the next level was, or one of the entrances, at any rate. Her bludger floated alongside her, and it bashed apart the first obstacle, a gate formed from thick wooden branches, all tangled together. She met few other obstacles after that, her planned route taking her away from most of the creatures and traps that she could see from the air. As she dashed under the next level for the first time, however, she saw something drift out of the shadows towards her. A cloaked figure, floating in the air, approached. She could see its dead, icy hands, smell the stench of rotting meat and seawater. She felt the cold seep into her, and for a moment she thought Bagman had been insane enough to put a Dementor in the maze. Expecto Patronum! Holly roared, a silver doe charging forth from her wand and sending the boggart flying backwards. Regaining her senses, Holly quickly charmed it into a man wearing a very unconvincing Dementor costume and grey face paint. The boggart fled into the hedges, chased away by Holly's laughter. She advanced into the shadowy depths below the next level, moving rapidly. She heard the fireworks signaling Fluus entrance, and then crumbs a minute later. She needed to move fast if she wanted to reach the cup first. She had to pay attention to where she was going, however, there were often roots sticking out or imperfections in the grass beneath her feet. Holly found a way up soon after Crumb entered the maze, a spiral staircase made out of weathered, vine-covered stone. An odd mist seemed to surround its base, and Holly could feel the magic in it even from some distance. She whispered a few quiet words and conjured forth a soft wind. It took on different colors and sounds as it encountered magic, and Holly didn't like what it showed her of the mist's magic, but she also knew that no one could see her right now. She transformed into her raven form and landed just above the mist. Holly made sure to transform back into herself before she emerged from the staircase and was in sight of the crowd again, and she advanced cautiously up to the next level. Here the walls of the maze were made from that same weathered stone instead of hedges, and she saw something new had been added since her last flight. A huge minotaur, seemingly made from moving marble and carrying a huge club, stood guard over the way forward. Holly recognized the enchantments from her first year, though this time it lacked the chess theme. It advanced towards her, hefting its club, and Holly grinned. Bombarda Maxima, she shouted, her curse blasting the stone monster apart in a tremendous explosion. It was like a dozen cannons all firing at once, and much of the walls behind it had bits of marble deeply embedded into them. Holly could hear the crowd cheer at that, and she gave a jaunty little bow to them before rushing deeper into the maze. Holly thought that this level seemed to be themed after ancient Greece, not just in the appearance of the maze itself but also the traps and creatures encountered. She had to dispel a hex that slowly covered her with stone, shield herself from a fire-breathing statue of a chimera, and this time she found the stairs guarded by a rather large, and rather familiar, three-headed dog. Fluffy growled at her with each of his 3 heads, but Holly knew enough magic now to conjure a fiddle and have it play itself a simple tune. She smiled at the Cerberus as it slept and carefully climbed up to the 3rd level of the maze. This second-last level looked distinctly ancient Egyptian to Holly, though she had no idea if the hieroglyphs were real writing or just there for aesthetic value. The walls were made from sand-colored stone, and the floor was packed sand. She had to navigate a number of mechanical traps and break a curse on a magically locked door to proceed. It was a fairly simple curse, as they went, but it was still NEWT-level arithmancy. Luckily curses like that were one of the many things Holly had covertly studied with the aid of her cloak. She guided the magical currents into a pattern that wouldn't harm her and then tried to unlock the door by magic. After perhaps a minute of that, Holly stood back and used a reductor curse to turn the door to dust. It seemed to hang in the air, and Holly could see it reforming before her eyes, so she leapt through it before it got too far. She heard spellfire up ahead, so Holly cast a disillusionment charm on herself and hoped the loud noises would muffle her footsteps. Fleur and Crumb seemed to be in a long-running fight, the longer range and plentiful cover letting it last much longer than the competition duels at 10 paces had. Holly had to duck as spells flew overhead, but she made it through without either champion realizing that she was there. A few turns later Holly found the long stone stairs up to the last level, the stone pavilion that held the altar with the cup. Standing guard over the stairs was a sphinx, a magical creature with the head of a woman and the body of a winged lion. "Greetings, young champion. You stand at the edge of victory, merely climb these steps and you shall walk into eternal glory. All you must do, is answer my riddle correctly. Fail to do so, and I attack. If your heart has deserted you, you may return the way you came," the Sphinx said, her voice deep and hoarse. "I'll take the riddle," Holly said. Then she heard it, someone ascending the steps on the other side of the stone pavilion rather loudly. Holly didn't have time for a complicated riddle, but she did have a vial of instant darkness powder in her pocket. The Sphinx began to recite her riddle, whilst Holly palmed the vial. She threw it with great speed, and before the Sphinx could react Holly had dashed past her, the enchanted glasses allowing her to see through the darkness. She heard a very angry roar behind her as she ran up the long stone steps, but she blasted a section behind her into dust with a reductor curse and kept sprinting to the top. Holly was rather fast on her feet, and she arrived at the top of the steps to the stone pavilion at the exact same time as Cedric. They stared at one another, wands in their hands, and slowly advanced towards each other. The cup lit the open-sided pavilion with soft blue light, and Holly felt her heart beat faster and faster. "Well, damn," Cedric said after a moment. "I figure you're probably the better duelist, and we're about as fast as one another. Want to toss a coin for it?" Cedric continued, and Holly laughed despite the tension. Then she heard a huge wing beating behind her. She turned for just an instant, and she saw a very angry Sphinx land at the top of the steps. Holly and Cedric both dashed for the cup at the same time, Holly only just avoiding the Sphinx's grasping claw. Cedric was right about how fast she was, Holly thought as they neared the cup. She might have been a little faster, but having to dodge the Sphinx's swipe had slowed her down just enough to even things out. She lunged for the cup just as Cedric did, and without a Muggle high-speed camera, there was no way to tell which of them had grasped it first. As Holly's hand gripped the handle on the cup's side, she felt a familiar sensation, a sharp tug on her navel. She and Cedric were sent whirling away through a confusing tunnel of warping space and multicolored light until they landed still clutching the cup face down in the dirt. Holly stood, brushing herself off, and she looked around. She and Cedric appeared to have been transported to a graveyard of some kind, full of old headstones and grandiose statues. Unlike the fine night back at Hogwarts, there was a bitterly cold wind blowing through the graveyard and rolling clouds that promised a storm nearly overhead. "Where do you think we are? Is this some kind of secret last stage to the amaze, you reckon?" Cedric asked. Holly felt a sudden pain in her scar, hot and searing and familiar. She shook her head, trying to think despite the pain. "No, I think something's up," Holly whispered, gritting her teeth against the pain. A figure stepped out from behind an elaborate statue of death, the shadow of the Reaper's scythe visible across her cloak. The woman lowered her hood, and Holly was shocked to see Madame Dupont's golden eyes staring at her. She heard movement behind them and then more from the tree line at the edge of the graveyard. "So nice of you to bring a date, Holly," a man said from behind her, and Holly whirled to look. She didn't recognize the handsome man who spoke, but something about his dark hair and cold eyes seemed familiar. She saw more cloaked figures, only barely visible in the shadows of the tree line. "Do rid us of the spare," Barty Dupont said, and Holly's eyes went wide. Chapter 69, Year 4, Chapter 35. Chapter Text. Holly's scar burst into even fiercer pain, and it was all she could do to remain standing. Her wand felt heavy in her hand like it was made from lead. Her vision clouded, and she thought of the oddest thing. In the haze of pain that clouded her thoughts, her mind wandered back to Ron's prophecy. Before Barty could finish his spell, Holly dragged Cedric down and to the left. The bolt of screaming green light passed overhead and blew apart a gravestone. Holly couldn't get back up, but Cedric stood up and fought. Bolts of light and explosions whizzed around her, but all she could see was that Cedric was still fighting. Only a few moments passed, but they felt like an eternity to Holly. Then the pain faded, becoming the familiar ache she had grown so used to. Holly stood, slowly, as Cedric and Barty duelled. The other figures, as well as DuPont, all seemed transfixed with the duel. Perhaps, Holly thought, they believed that she'd fallen unconscious. Her wand felt warm in her hand, a burning heat that seemed as though it would char her skin, yet felt almost comforting. Holly heard faint strains of Phoenix song. She turned and struck at Barty, whipping crackling lightning at him with enough force to shatter his shield charm like a car through a window. Multicolored shards of magic flew everywhere, and Holly did not give Crouch a moment to recover. "Get the hell away from him, Crouch!" Holly shouted, the crack of another lightning curse echoing her words. "Now you're really done for, asshole!" Cedric shouted as Holly pelted Barty with blasting curses. "Some half-blood freak who's read a few dark books could never compare to me. The Dark Lord himself taught me the darkest arts, boy." Barty replied, his smile manic and his eyes cold. He conjured cursed black flames, but as he shaped them into snakes he was forced to destroy them, for Holly turned each of them against their conjurer, and wove dark curses also in the tongue of serpents. Cedric seemed surprised at the spells Holly was using, but he was holding his own. He might not know the sorts of deadly dark magic Holly and Crouch did, but blasting curses and cutting hexes were dangerous enough on their own. "Back to the cup, Holly, we should be able to," Cedric said, and then it happened. Holly saw the bright green light in the corner of her eye, and she turned too late. Cedric slumped bonelessly to the ground, his eyes dead and glassy. Faint wisps of acrid green smoke rose from his back, and DuPont lowered her wand, still glowing slightly from the power of the unforgivable curse. "Dear me, Barty. It seems that one overachieving badger and a 14-year-old girl were too much for you," DuPont said, her sing-song voice almost a cackle. She walked forward, and Holly stared in shock at Cedric's body. She sank to her knees and touched his face, feeling the unnatural coldness the killing curse left behind. "Cedric," Holly said, her voice barely more than a hoarse whisper. She felt tears well in her eyes, and the whispers grew louder. "I had it under control," Jean Barty growled, and the whispers grew louder. "We can make them hurt." "Oh. You were taking your sweet time dealing with that waste of pure blood, let alone the Potter brat. Not that that's a surprise, didn't she derail your little stunt at the World Cup?" DuPont said, and the whispers grew louder. Holly heard Phoenix song, too, but it could not drown out the whispers. "We can make them pay. He was chosen to oppose the Dark Lord. It is little surprise that the degenerate should be possessed of some power," Barty replied, and the whispers grew louder. "We can make them die." Holly closed Cedric's eyes, knowing that she wanted no one good or decent to see what was about to happen. She wiped away her own tears and felt the magic all around her. Crouch and DuPont had taken her somewhere where lie lines met, a place of power. She stood, and both Crouch and DuPont turned towards her. Holly raised her wand, slowly and deliberately. Her heartbeat had slowed, and her hand was as still as ice. She knew the words, the motion. She knew the hate. She had always known because the whispers had told her. They had told her in her cupboard, they had told her when she had faced Kirill, and when she'd had her wand to the heir's back. "What are you going to do, freak? Cast some more curses you learnt out of a library book at me? I don't think you have it in you to do real dark magic, no matter how much you hate me," Crouch sneered. "Avada Kedavra." Holly snarled, and she felt the stain creep into her. She put all of her hate into one spell, one screaming cry of rage and anguish. She saw the green light roar from her wand, heard the whistling, screaming noise. She saw Barty Crouch Jr. die by her hand, saw the look of utter shock on his face, and only then could she hear anything over the whispers. DuPont was staring at her, just as wide-eyed as Holly was. She could only look at her wand in horror, feeling sick as little motes of green light were carried away from the still glowing tip on the cold wind. I didn't, Holly said weakly, but she could say nothing. She had meant to kill Barty, she had known exactly what would happen when she'd cast the killing curse. She could hear the Phoenix song now, like a roaring chorus or waves crashing on a rocky shore. Then something hit her hard in the back, the world went dark. She woke some time later, though from what her bleary eyes could see she couldn't have been unconscious too long. It was still night, and Holly could see that the dark clouds had just arrived, perhaps half an hour, she thought. As her vision cleared, she realized something was holding her upright, something cold and immovable. The statue of the Reaper, of what wizards might call a deathly power, had been enchanted to hold Holly tight with one of its stone arms. The other held a skeletal hand over her mouth. She could breathe, but not talk. She could see the pattern on the inside of the statue's cloak, now, and she thought there was something familiar about it. The other figures Holly had seen were now fully visible. Some of them wore the robes and skull masks of the Death Eaters, some were dressed in dragon hide and goblin chain like DuPont, and some were dressed in yet more styles, furs, formal robes. Holly saw Barty's body lying where it had fallen, and she felt sick. She could still feel the cold killing magic, like an echo on her soul. Cedric was lying not all that far away, and then the Triwizard Cup. She saw for the first time the name on the headstone the statue was guarding, Tom Riddle, and Holly felt dread. A huge, bubbling cauldron had been set up not far from her, full of what looked to be blood, and Holly could see one of the Death Eaters standing next to it. His hood and mask were down, though, and Holly saw Lucius Malfoy stir the potion with a look of utter terror on his face. DuPont was standing nearby, holding some sort of bundle, and another figure was chanting in what Holly thought might have been Old Norse. He was a tall, slender man with long, matted blonde hair. He wore only a pair of dark leather pants, turned a rusty red with old bloodstains, and every inch of his bare chest was covered in runes. They seemed to have been burnt into his skin, and they glowed with a fell red light as he chanted, growing brighter and brighter. There was a flash of red light, and the crackling fire beneath the cauldron became a bright crimson inferno. It took the form of a coil of snakes, whirling and writhing beneath the cauldron. Holly could feel the magic rushing towards it, as whatever spell the man had used tapped deeply into the natural magic of the world. "It is done," asked a high, cold voice, one that was very familiar to Holly. It seemed to have come from the bundle DuPont was holding like a baby. "It is, my lord. The fires of rebirth have been lit, and the dragon's blood is ready," DuPont said, her voice breathy and excited. "Then begin," the voice said again, and DuPont strode forwards. Holly got only a glimpse of whatever was in the bundle of dark cloth, but she didn't need to see to know who the deformed bay-like creature was. To know who that high voice was. Her scar burned, and Holly was thankful for the hand covering her mouth. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of screaming in pain. DuPont lowered the bundle into the boiling dragon's blood almost reverently, and the crimson fire beneath roared higher. She looked to Malfoy, whose face seemed to have turned to a stony impassiveness. He raised his long, dark wand and spoke. "Bone of the father, unknowingly given, you will renew your son." Lucius Malfoy chanted and was echoed by a dozen more voices. The stone beneath Holly's feet cracked open with a tremendous snapping noise. Holly's eyes went wide with horror as she saw dust rise up out of the grave and flow into the bubbling cauldron. As the bone touched the liquid inside, the fire beneath the cauldron turned a familiar bright green. "Flesh of the servant, willingly given, you will revive your master." Malfoy chanted, his voice without emotion or inflection. He slashed at his left hand with his wand, and Holly stared in horror as it fell into the boiling liquid. The wound had an unnatural sheen and no blood spurted from it. The liquid now turned dark green, glowing faintly. "Blood of the enemy, forcibly taken, you will resurrect your foe." Malfoy chanted one final time, and he advanced on Holly. She stared up at him, defiantly, and he touched his wand to her arm. He moved it carefully across her arm, his cutting charm drawing blood and sending it into the cauldron. Holly felt the pain, but it was barely noticeable next to her scar. The liquid turned the same bright green color as the fire, only for the fire to entirely engulf the cauldron. It became a towering beam of writhing snakes, each formed from fire, and then after only a moment, it went out. The liquid inside the cauldron seemed to have all evaporated in that instant, noxious green steam rising from the cauldron as Holly felt the pain in her scar grow more and more. Something rose out of the cauldron. It was a man, tall and skeletally thin. His skin was unhealthily pallid, and as he walked forward the cauldron seemed to melt away before him. He wove shadows into a simple, unadorned set of black robes, and for the first time that night, Holly saw Voldemort's face. It was inhuman, with a snake-like nose and utterly hairless. His eyes were a scarlet red, and they glowed softly in the moonlight. He smiled as he saw her, and Holly felt sick. Everyone, Death Eater and foreign dark wizards alike, knelt as Voldemort stood. The wind grew louder and faster, the bitterly cold air carrying away the steam and stench of blood and brimstone. Lightning flashed in the distance, and Holly could only stare in wide-eyed horror. Lord Voldemort had returned. Chapter 70, Year 4, Chapter 36. Chapter text. Hello, Holly. I have heard so many things about you, heard of your power. I must admit, at first I thought them the words of fools and desperate old men, but I have seen more, this year. You have performed admirably, though not even your power could prevent my return, Voldemort said, walking closer and closer to Holly. Nobody else stood yet, they were all still on their knees. Holly couldn't speak, the stone hand was still covering her mouth, but she could move her feet a little. She could focus her mind, and sense the magic around her. This graveyard, this town, they were a nexus of ley lines, a place where natural magic converged. There was power in the air, in the earth, in the wind here. All Holly had to do was harness it. For that, she needed a little time. How foolish of me, you can't reply. There, isn't that better? Voldemort asked as the statue moved its skeletal hand away from Holly's mouth. Screw you, Holly said, her voice hoarse. Now that's not very nice. You've been so helpful to me, after all, delivering exactly the thing I needed here right on schedule, Voldemort said, leaning in closer and closer to Holly. She felt her scar burn, and then the faintest trickle of blood burst from it. You could have used anybody who hated you for that ritual. Why me? Why go through all that with fixing the tournament instead of having DuPont curse me in the back? Holly asked, drawing in the grave dirt at her feet slowly and subtly. Because there is power in your blood, girl. Your mother's sacrifice was powerful enough to kill me, once, and powerful enough to drive me from the stone. Now that same blood that shielded you all these years runs in my veins. Now I can touch you, Voldemort said, and pressed a finger to her scar. Holly screamed as the pain ripped through her, and Voldemort's finger was covered in blood as he took it away. I didn't need the protection to kill the you in your diary, or your stupid snake, Holly said, looking Voldemort straight in the eyes. She sent her memory of Riddle's final, fearful scream towards his mind again and again. Lucius has informed me of your victory over my past self. After that, only a fool could doubt your power. Poor Barty did, and look where that got him. He was such a good boy, so loyal, so charming. But you have power. We could do great things together, Voldemort said, and still, the others had not risen. It seemed like in his mind, the only people in the graveyard were him and Holly. What makes you think I'd ever help you? Holly said, and she felt the power grow within her. She felt the storm above with her mind, felt the earth below, and the statue holding her. She just needed time. There is darkness in you, girl, and do not deny it. I saw the spell you used to kill Barty, the hate in your eyes. What can Dumbledore and his school offer you compared to me? I can teach you the secrets of Sorlaser Slytherin and Herpo the Foul, the ancient magics lost to the dark places of history. I can give you power, Voldemort said, and one of the Death Eaters shifted a little. Voldemort whirled around, and he lifted Lucius Malfoy into the air with a mere gesture. Malfoy's hands went to his neck, but something slipped through them. A heavy silver locket seemed to almost drag Lucius through the air towards Voldemort. He held out a hand, and a long new wand rose from Barty's body into it. He took the locket in his hands and opened it. Holly could see that there was a note inside. Something about the locket seemed familiar to her. She had seen it somewhere before, but she couldn't remember where. Where did you get this? Voldemort asked, his voice almost shaking from anger. Malfoy looked utterly terrified. An elf, once belonging to the Blacks. Ah, of course. Probably the same creature. No, that is unimportant. This is his amulet, and yet I cannot feel. Who else has worn this, Lucius? Voldemort asked, his voice cold. Holly's eyes narrowed. The elf said we should all try it, my lord. He said that was your instruct. Malfoy began, but Voldemort cut him off with a Cruciatus curse. He then let Malfoy fall to the ground and ripped the locket from its thin silver chain. Gone. All gone. How did he? Voldemort said. Holly didn't know what had so alarmed Voldemort, but she wanted to find out. She delved into Lucius's mind, the pain of the curse allowing her easy access, and she saw flashes. A house elf, handing a locket to his new master. Slytherin's locket, kept safe all these years. She heard the locket whisper, suggest things. How all three of the Malfoys should wear it, but Draco most of all. How it wanted to know her strength, how it had instructed Creature to put her name in the goblet. How it had slowly turned each of the Malfoys against one another, twisted them until they all desired it to belong to them alone. How Draco had stolen it, thinking to destroy it, to stop it from twisting his family any further. How he had held it above the cursed flame, and how it had overcome him. How his face had melted as the memory inside the locket had overtaken him, and how nothing of him remained. Just a disguise so flawless it could fool even Albus Dumbledore and the Marauder's map. Holly's eyes went wide as she realized what had happened. Whatever the diary had been, Voldemort hadn't simply made one in his school days, he'd made more. One of them had been the locket Lucius Malfoy was currently wearing, but it no longer held any memory of Voldemort, any of his power. Because it had done what the diary could not, and returned. It had bided its time and stolen a body for good, utterly annihilating whatever might have remained of Draco. Holly felt sick. Draco might have been her enemy at school, but he hadn't deserved that. She'd heard his screams as his face melted. She saw the note, then. It was written in familiar handwriting, and lay in just the right angle so that she could read it in the little moonlight that made its way through the clouds. To the victor the spoils. By the time you read this, I shall be long gone, along with every galleon dear Lucius had. I will return and take what should have been mine. There is, after all, only room for one Dark Lord. Lord Voldemort had not only returned, he had returned twice. Somewhere out there was a second Voldemort, running around with Draco Malfoy's body, and he had been ever since the last Hogsmeade weekend. Malfoy had gone to visit his parents in the village, Holly remembered. She hadn't seen him act unusual ever since, no more crying or fearful looks. She needed to escape, to tell Dumbledore what had happened. She channeled more power through the lines, working magic without word or gesture, only will. Such put magic into the storm above, the ground below, and the many statues of the graveyard. She could never use magic like that in a fight, but she was lucky that Voldemort loved to hear himself talk, and that he'd gotten distracted by Malfoy. Oh Lucius, did you not listen when I entrusted the diary to you? You were not to allow anyone to fall under its spell. We must move quickly, then, Avada Kedavra, Voldemort said, almost casually turning the killing curse on Lucius. My lord? Dupont asked. Dear Lucius has been most foolish with one of my things, my dear. But our plans can continue, Holly. I had almost forgotten. Have you considered my offer? Voldemort asked her, as the others started to rise. Holly had to close her eyes because the sheer power she was channeling through her body had caused them to glow. She could feel the magic burning in her veins, now. It was power unlike any she had experienced before, like she was tapping into some cosmic power socket with a fork. Not even you will join you, Tom. I'm not going to join your stupid collection of sycophants and losers, Holly said. She needed just another moment. A pity. I had planned to duel you, to show how weak the so-called girl who lived was. Fantasied about it, as I felt the pain of my homunculus's body. But foolish and young you may be, I cannot call you weak. Such a bout would be an unacceptable risk, I do hope you understand. And you ready to die, then, Holly Potter? Voldemort asked her, and Holly felt the magic click into place. No. Are you? Holly asked, and she opened her eyes. They were glowing bright green, and as she released the magic she had been ever so slowly building, there was the audible noise of Phoenix song. The statue of death released her, and its stone scythe smashed into Voldemort's chest before he could react. He was thrown backwards, not cut by the dull blade, but winded, and landed in a heap some distance away. All around the graveyard stone angels, babies, and animals came to life. The stone figures had the strength of a troll and hides of thick marble, and they had all of Holly's rage. Lightning struck a half-dozen of the dark wizards in the clearing as the storm clouds above burst to life, a torrential downpour transforming the smooth dirt and grass of the graveyard into mud. It tried to swallow the Death Eaters, becoming almost a living thing that snatched at them and tried to drag them down into the graves. One foreign dark wizard was gored to death by a stone unicorn, and another trampled. Many of them tried to destroy the statues, and some succeeded. Stone was only so much of a defense against magic, even stone imbued with power like that Holly had given the statues. More were lying injured or dead from the lightning strikes, and several had been taken beneath the earth. A Death Eater, perhaps Goyle, she thought, tried to stop her. Holly cut him down with an arc of crackling black lightning as she strode forward. The mud was as solid as stone for her, and the lightning would not touch her. Voldemort rose, and Holly saw as he simply floated above the ground, flight, without broomstick or carpet. His face was contorted with a look of pure anger, blood seeping into his robes where the Reaper had smashed in his ribs. "Dumbledore has taught you well," Voldemort said, his injuries seemingly no distraction. "Better than you could have," Holly said, and she raised her wand. "Do you mean to fight me, girl? Your tricks might have let you turn this place against me, but you know you cannot defeat me in open combat," Voldemort said, floating slowly towards her. DuPont was holding off a half-dozen statues, including the Reaper that had held Holly captive. It swung at her shield charm, stone sparking on the field of magical energy. She blasted apart a child-sized angel and conjured vines to hold down a rampaging unicorn. Lightning struck from the sky at her, but her shield charms were strong. "Maybe, but what did you call it? An unacceptable risk." "I think I'll take my chances," Holly said. She extended her magic into the pools of water that had gathered in the numerous craters that now dotted the graveyard, remembering Dumbledore's words. "Avada Kedavra!" Voldemort shouted, and Holly called the rainwater to her defense. The killing curse exploded against it, turning it into a cloud of sizzling steam. Again Voldemort cast, and again Holly blocked it with the rainwater. Holly slashed her wand at Voldemort, sending a crackling whip of lightning towards him just as he cast another killing curse. For a moment Holly thought she'd been too slow, but the two spells seemed to veer into one another in midair. They exploded in a shower of sparks, and Holly felt something in her wand, heard a distant strain of Phoenix song. She cast again, this time a disarming charm, the fastest spell she could cast. Voldemort nearly matched her in speed with the usually vastly slower killing curse, and Holly knew that without whatever magic caused their spells to collide, she would have been dead. She simply wasn't good enough to fight Voldemort head-on, and they both knew it. Then one of her disarming charms met another of his killing curses in midair, but this time they did not explode. Holly felt something touch her wand, a thin beam of golden light extending out from it, as it did from Voldemort's wand. It felt like her wand was on fire, but Holly held on for dear life. The storm raged around them, stone warriors and living mud fighting against dozens of dark wizards. All the while, Holly and Voldemort were connected by the strange thread of golden light. Chapter 71, Year 4, Chapter 37. Chapter text. "Do not interfere." Voldemort cried out, but his words were swallowed up by the noise of the storm. Lightning struck so rapidly that the thunder seemed to merge into one continuous explosion of noise, and the sounds of the Death Eaters defending themselves against the statues filled any quiet moment. Rain poured down around them, and as the golden beam connected Holly's wand with Voldemort's it seemed to bend around the two of them. Where raindrops would get near them, they sizzled away into steam in midair. Holly felt herself be lifted off the ground, and she saw it happen to Voldemort too. They were suspended in midair, the golden beam still linking their wands. Energy, wild and powerful magic, crackled along it and split off like arcs of electricity. Thousands of golden beams curved around them, forming a cage that neither the wind or the rain could breach. A bolt of lightning struck it, but could not go through it, nor could the stray spells that splashed harmlessly against it. The Death Eaters and other dark wizards in the clearing seemed then to notice what was going on, notice the cage of golden light. They could spare little time to focus on it though, the statues were still fighting them, though many had been blasted apart, and they had to seek shelter from the storm. As the cage formed, Holly thought she heard something. She wasn't sure what it was, but even through the noise of the storm and the battle raging outside, she could hear whispers. They weren't like the ones in her head, the ones that had her voice but with a coldness she'd never known. They sounded like a chorus, heard from another room. "What have you done?" Voldemort asked, confused and, Holly thought, perhaps a little afraid. She didn't answer, instead focusing on her wand. She felt the tremendous heat of it, but she knew it wouldn't burn her. She felt the magic flowing through her and into the beam of golden light, heard the hum of it, a frequency, maybe. Then, as the last threads of golden light touched the ground, Holly heard a familiar song. Phoenix song, the same thing she'd been hearing throughout the entire ceremony, but far louder. No longer did it sound distant, no longer did it hover so faintly at the edge of her hearing that it might have been a memory. It was somehow louder than the crack of thunder and the roar of the wind without being painful. It simply had more authority than them, Holly thought. A sound so magical that it had to be heard over anything else. "Hold on, Holly," she heard in her ear, the whisper crisp and clean as though someone had been standing right beside her. It was a woman's voice, though not one she recognized. More and more energy seemed to rush into the central beam, and then Holly felt it, some force pushing against her. She pushed back, and she realized that she and Voldemort were engaged in some kind of struggle, not a physical one, but a mental one. She could only rely on her will, as could he. The Phoenix song made the tiredness in Holly's muscles disappear, the fog of fatigue and self-doubt disappear from her mind. It felt like she'd had a good night's rest and more, allowing her to think with utter clarity. She knew it would not last, that the trauma of what she'd endured here, of what she'd done here, would last far longer than the relief whatever this magic was provided. But for now, it was enough, and she knew it would not have the same effect on Voldemort. She focused all her will, every ounce of courage and every inch of determination, and pushed. She felt her wand get hotter and hotter as yet more magic flowed through her. She saw her veins glow the same gold as the energy connecting her and Voldemort, and saw it do the same thing to him. She saw the red glow of his eyes be swallowed up by that golden light and felt it happen to her. Each of them was calling on more magic than they could ever channel normally, taking more and more from whatever it was that wizards drew their powers from. Holly felt every part of her burn, and yet there was no pain. The Phoenix song soothed her, healed her burning skin and boiling blood. Voldemort could not withstand it, and she realized then that he had some weakness, some part of his dark power that could not withstand it the way she could. She pushed harder and harder, knowing that she was surely placing herself in danger. A witch could not use up all her magic, or exhaust herself with it, but everyone could only channel so much at one time. Holly was far beyond that point now, and this was not the ordered, clan magic that she used to cast spells. It was wild, like the natural magic she'd used to animate the statues and call down the storm. Then, all at once, it seemed like a surge of magic ran down the golden beam connecting her and Voldemort. It slammed into his wand, and there was what sounded like a scream of pain, although Voldemort's mouth was firmly shut. Strange ghostly shapes flew out of his wand, echoes, perhaps. She saw illusionary water explode into steam half a dozen times, and then a man emerged from the wand. He was old, youthful muscle giving way to fat. She couldn't tell what color his hair had been, but she was sure it would have been gray. He was dressed like a muggle, just an ordinary man, she thought. He could have been any older fellow from any country town. He was a real wizard then. "You fight him, girl," the ghost said, and Holly nodded. He floated in the air, and Voldemort looked at him disdainfully. "I will," she promised, and she looked at Voldemort's U-wand. She saw more smoke forming, and she knew what would be next. She was afraid of what would be next. She wanted more than anything to hear her voice, but she was afraid of what she'd say. She almost let go of her wand, but somehow she managed to hold on to it as a ghostly wand formed near Voldemort. Lily Potter glided towards Holly, and she looked just like she did in photos Holly had seen. She couldn't see her red hair, or her green eyes, but she knew. She saw her mother smile at her, her face full of warmth, and Holly felt relief, She put her hand to Holly's face, and she felt a strange warmth. It was nothing like the coldness she'd felt when a ghost had touched her. "You've been so brave, Holly." Hold on just for a little longer," her mother said, and Holly felt tears roll down her cheeks. She knew she would never forget hearing her mother say her name with such love in her voice, even if she lived to be as old as Dumbledore. She couldn't speak, but she nodded. She saw the next shape emerge from Voldemort's wand, and James Potter glided towards her. The ghosts, shades, memories, whatever they were, her parents were on either side of her. "It's a beautiful name, Holly. We can stay for only moments after you break the connection, but we'll give you as long as we can," her father said, and she knew he would. "You have to get to the portkey, Holly. It will take you back, you understand?" her mother asked her. I understand," Holly said, her voice wavering. "I love you so much, my wonderful daughter," her mother said, and Holly felt more tears fall from her eyes. "I know you can do this, Holly. When you break the connection, call on them. They'll listen, and the people here have their own scores to settle with him," her father said, and Holly only half understood. Voldemort was staring at her in horror, and the battle outside the cage seemed to have died down. The last of the statues had been destroyed. The storm still raged, and Holly hoped that would be enough. Break it now," her mother said, and Holly looked at her one last time. Then, turning to look at her father, she yanked her wand upwards. The golden cord shattered, and she and Voldemort fell to the ground slowly. The cage around them started to decay, and the three ghosts rushed towards Voldemort. Holly remembered her father's words, and she felt the magic around her. She felt the magic beneath the earth, and beyond this place. She knew that here, somehow, if she called that they would listen. They could not stay long, because they were not ghosts, but they could stay long enough. The last of her tears dropped into the watery ground below, and Holly called out with her magic. Ghostly figures rose from every grave, men and women and children of all ages. They rushed towards Voldemort and towards his followers, and Holly knew that without them she wouldn't have had the time to escape so many dark wizards. She ran, the Phoenix song already fading from her tired muscles. The cup was still glowing blue in the distance, and Holly raced towards it. She passed Cedric's body, and she looked at it for only a moment. He'd been killed by Dupont, so he had said nothing to her, but she grabbed his still warm hand and held out her wand. "Accio," she cried, and the cup flew towards her. Someone fired off a spell, but it was just moments too late as Holly touched the cup with her wand hand. She disappeared in a whirl of color and sound, her hand clutching Cedric's. She landed on the grass of the pitch, just in front of the entrance to the maze. Fireworks exploded above her, and she heard the cheer of the crowd. She released Cedric's hand, and his corpse flopped limply into the grass. Her face was streaked with blood, and her right arm was covered in it. Holly sank to her knees, the exhaustion hitting her like a wave. She saw someone move in the crowd. She saw Malfoy stand, touching his hand to a necklace hidden beneath his robes. A portkey. She felt her wand fall from her fingers as Malfoy disappeared in a flash of light, smiling at her all the while. Someone screamed, but Holly couldn't pick them out of the crowd. It was all too loud, too much noise rushing at her. She saw someone running towards her, but her glasses had fallen off of her face. She felt around for them, her fingers running across them in the grass, and then people were surrounding her. Amos Diggory wailed over his son's body, and Sirius and Remus seemed to be physically shielding Holly from view. Dumbledore appeared then, and Holly saw the crowd of onlookers part before him. Holly knew she'd only have the strength to say a few words. She could already feel the tiredness spread throughout her, feel the pressure behind her eyes to just close them. Everything hurt. "Yes, he's back," Holly said, and she felt her strength leave her even as she spoke. She fell forwards and, for the second time that day, the world faded to black. Chapter 72, Year 4, Chapter 38. Chapter text. Holly woke up in the hospital wing, staring up at a familiar ceiling. Everything hurt, but there was a numbness to it, like it was happening to some other Holly. She didn't like the feeling. She scrambled for her glasses, found them by her bedside, and sat up entirely too fast. Her vision swam, and her back screamed in that same dull, foreign pain. It pains me that we keep meeting like this, Holly Dumbledore said, and Holly turned her head to see him sitting in one of his conjured armchairs. No one else, not even Madame Pomfrey, was in the hospital wing. How long have I been? Only a few minutes. I am afraid I asked Madame Pomfrey to wake you up and to give you something for your pain, quite against her advice. We have precious little time if what you said has really happened, Dumbledore said. It happened, Holly said, quiet and angry. Never think that I doubt you, my dear girl. In any other case, I would let you sleep, for your injuries are both severe and unusual. But Voldemort's back. That's not the worst of it, Holly said, and Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. He had another diary, well, not another diary. It was a locket, but it had a memory of him in it. It took over Draco Malfoy. Fully. Entirely, it has subsumed him. Dumbledore asked. I saw his dad's memory of his face melting off. There's nothing of that stupid GIT left, and I'm sad about it. I hated him, and he hated me, Holly said, pulling her knees up beneath the sheets and putting her arms around them. Because he was a boy caught up in the schemes of those older and more powerful than him, and they destroyed him. Empathy is not weakness, Holly, Dumbledore said. I used it, Holly whispered, ashamed. Her wand hand was still as she remembered pouring all of her hate, all of her fury, into the spell. Into the killing curse. Of that, I am well aware. Fortunately, I took the liberty to edit the history of your wand, before any errors arrived, Dumbledore said. His voice didn't have that tone of levity, and his eyes didn't sparkle, but it wasn't condemnation either. Maybe I deserve to go to Azkaban, Holly said. She couldn't look at Dumbledore, couldn't face him. She'd promised him, long ago, not to use a spell like the Unforgivables. You were a 14-year-old girl surrounded by dangerous killers who wished you harm. Killers who had already slain your friend. I will not judge you for what you did to save yourself. I am only glad you were able to return to us. Nobody is free of evil in their heart, of hate. Just moments ago, you showed compassion for a boy you professed to hate. Darkness does not rule your heart, Holly, Dumbledore said, his voice quiet and soothing. It seemed to blend, almost, with the quiet ticking of the clock above Holly's bed. I saw my parents, Holly said, her voice barely above a whisper. How did? Of course. Brother Wands, Dumbledore said, and Holly managed a small smile at seeing her headmaster work it out so quickly. She wanted to ask about what he meant by Brother Wands, but she was still a little out of it. Were they real? Holly asked, desperate to know. Desperate to have one little point of light in that awful place. There is no magic that can bring the dead back to life, Holly, but in rare cases, they might be called to this plane. A spirit, not a ghost, but a spirit, might be called by especially strong magic. And a clash between Brother Wands, by a witch and a wizard as powerful as you and Tom Riddle. That is powerful enough, Dumbledore said, carefully. That's not a yes or no, Holly replied. It isn't. Despite what school rumor, and poorly written chocolate frog cards, may claim, I do not know everything there is to know about magic. Merely most of it. But, though I cannot say for certain, I do think they were spirits, not mere projections, Dumbledore said, and Holly smiled. Everything still hurt, Voldemort was still back, and Cedric was still dead, but her parents had really said those things. She said my name, Holly said, tears in her eyes. She knew she'd remember that forever, remember her mother's soft voice. Remember how her parents had done nothing but love her. I am not surprised. If there was one quality that both your parents shared, it was the ability to care for those our society does not. There are very few teenage boys who would willingly be friends with a werewolf, and fewer still who would become animagi for them. Now, I think, it is time for you to get back to your rest. I have kept you from it long enough, Dumbledore said, rising. He waved his wand, and Holly felt sleep overtake her with surprising speed. She closed her eyes, still wet with tears, and welcomed sleep. She woke up quite a while later, judging by the sunlight just creeping above the horizon. People seemed to be clustered around her bed, all of them asleep. Sirius and Remus, holding hands and leaning into one another. Ron, Ginny, and Hermione were sitting on the other side of her bed. Holly still hurt, but it was an ordinary pain, one that'd go away soon enough. It was no longer that intense but dulled pain she'd felt before. She looked away from the bed across the hospital wing, the one with the curtains drawn closed. She knew whose body was lying there, cold and stiff, and dead. "I'm sorry, Cedric." I'm sorry, Holly said, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't like him like she once did, but Holly knew that Cedric Diggory had been one of the best people she'd known. Loyal, hard-working, and fair to a fault. He'd had the courage of a lion, but it was his heart that had made him great. And, because of her, it would never beat again. Death was with her, she thought bitterly. Those dogs she'd been seeing, the first time, at Hermione's house and then again this year. The way that statue had been so easy to influence, it hadn't taken any effort, like the others. It had wanted to listen to her, wanted to follow her commands. It had even had the same inner lining on its cloak as her invisibility cloak. It was all superstition and coincidence, of course. She'd probably just seen a dog, and the lining of her invisibility cloak had to be a common enough pattern. The sort of half-dream, half-thoughts she had in the strange space between being asleep and being awake weren't the kind of thing she had to worry about. She had more than enough worries in the waking world. "Good to see you," Kid Sirius said, smiling as he opened his eyes. "It's good to see you too, Sirius," Holly said. "I should stay until you're out of here," Sirius began, but Holly cut him off. "But Dumbledore needs you and Remus somewhere." "Go. Just knowing there was someone waiting for me to wake up is enough," Holly said, and she meant it. Ginny woke up next, as she hopped onto Holly's bed. She hugged Holly, and Holly was damn tempted to kiss her, though her breath was probably awful. "I was so worried," Ginny said, not letting go of her. "I'm fine, see. Still got all my limbs and everything," Holly said, smiling a little. As dark as the world was these days, she thought it needed a little laughter. "Is he really back?" Ginny asked, her voice low and steady and full of emotion locked in a steel cage. "He's back," Holly said, and Ginny hugged her tighter. Maybe, Holly thought, it might turn out all right in the end, if she had her friends, and her girlfriend, with her. She knew she could face him, now. She'd been so afraid of not being up to it when the time came. That she'd fold when she had to look him, the real him, in the eye. That afternoon, as Holly was still recovering in her hospital wing bed, she had a rather more official visitor. Fudge, Dumbledore, and a number of uniformed people Holly assumed were hit wizards walked into the hospital wing. She tensed up for a moment, holding her wand beneath her sheets, thinking that they were here to arrest her, but Dumbledore seemed calmed. She relaxed a little. It just can't be true, Dumbledore. After all these years, he's back. And this business about two of him. Fudge exclaimed as he approached Holly's bed. "I think you will find Miss Potter's testimony most instructive, Cornelius. And you've seen her wand's record. I'm quite sure the accidental magic reversal squad picked up that storm," Dumbledore said. "And all they found was the body of that Crouch fellow and a ruined graveyard. Now, I don't doubt we have a problem, Dumbledore, but it just, oh, you're awake." Fudge squeaked, as he saw Holly sitting up in her bed. "I'm safely in the land of the living, Minister," Holly said. "Well, we're all glad about that. Dumbledore here has been, well, he's been saying some things," Fudge said, awkwardly. "Like that Voldemort's back." Holly replied, her tone neutral. He just can't be. Look, Minister. I'll let you view my memory, take Veritaserum, whatever you want. He's back, and there's two of him this time," Holly said. "Memories can be faked. Crouch and this foreign woman, DuPont, that was her name, could have implanted it in your mind." Fudge said, his voice almost hysterical. Holly knew that he didn't really believe what he was saying. "Cornelius, can I call you Cornelius? Anyway, you know Dumbledore's advice has never led you astray, and neither has mine. Barty Crouch Sr. was clearly way more guilty than any of us thought, and you put him in Azkaban. Do you want to be remembered as anything but a coward?" "Don't ignore this," Holly said, looking right at Fudge. "A coward? Why, I've never. What other word is there for someone who'd rather leave Britain defenseless instead of acknowledging the truth? We still have time, Voldemort's not ready to move, and his copy has to run around in Draco Malfoy's body. He'll be weaker, at least for a while, and the two of them hate each other. If we act now, before they get organized, Holly began. I can't, he can't be, Fudge started, but then he stopped. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He clutched at his chest, his eyes wide. Dumbledore looked alarmed, and he was already turning to call for Pomfrey before Fudge collapsed to the floor. The hit wizards drew their wands, casting interlocking shielding charms Holly had only vaguely heard of, sending pulses of light around the room to reveal hidden assassins, and one, with a white armband with a red M in the center around his arm, crouched over the minister. Madame Pomfrey rushed over, and the two of them tried everything. Spells to heal damage to the body, spells to keep someone breathing, potions to unblock the arteries, and to repair the heart. Holly watched them with wide eyes, and she breathed a sigh of relief as a breathing minister was lifted into a bed. Dumbledore and the head of the minister's bodyguards were talking into a fire on the other side of the hostel wing. That was close, Poppy. If he hadn't been here or on St. Mungo's wards, the hit wizard with the armband said. He'll have damage, permanent damage. Magic can do so little for the brain. Will he be able to continue as minister? The hit wizard asked quietly. Continue as minister? Carl, you know that might well kill him. He barely survived the stress of this, let alone a. There might not be war, Poppy. Oh, you know full well there will be, Carl. And, there's nothing any healer can do for his brain. He'd have to have drunk liquid luck to have escaped without damage there, Madame Pomfrey said. Holly felt cold. Voldemort was back, and the Minister for Magic was lying unconscious and brain-damaged after a heart attack. Right now, when it needed a leader the most, magical Britain had had its government decapitated by stress, age, and simple human frailty. Chapter 73, Year 4, Chapter 39. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Holly woke covered in sweat and shivering, her heart beating like a jackhammer in her chest. She was in the girls' dorms at Hogwarts, not back in the graveyard. She could still feel the wild magic she had unleashed there at the very edge of her perception. It was fading more and more every day, but she knew it would return if she ever found herself in that graveyard again. There was a reason witches had turned to wands and impersonal, mathematically perfect devices. A reason the only magic to tap ley lines in the modern day was formed from quartz and a robotic symphony of runes and arithmancy. To invite such wild, untamed power into her own body, a witch would have to be insane. Or, Holly thought bitterly, desperate enough that it seemed like a good idea at the time. Since she knew she wasn't getting back to sleep, Holly got out of bed and headed for an early shower. She was no longer quite so awkward about it as she once had been, but her dormmates hadn't been the thing she was most afraid of seeing in there. It was still dark out, and that was perfect. A quick charm to prevent the noise from escaping, and Holly collapsed into the shower. She cried as the warm water and noise ablated any other sensation. She sat on the floor, glad that the house elves kept it so clean, and hugged her knees. She was fine physically, now. It had only taken a few days for Madame Pomfrey to restore the damage Holly had done to her own body, but there was nothing the dependable matron could do for her mind. Her memories hounded her even here. She saw Cedric fall, felt herself kill Barty Crouch Jr., felt herself unleash that storm. She had killed again. Dumbledore had reassured her, but she couldn't help but notice how her body count was rising. How she'd turned loose magic that had killed without direction. Was all this death really worth her life? Cedric had died because of her, her parents had given their lives for her, and she had killed so many people to defend herself. Voldemort, in his many incarnations, was not something that filled her with guilt, but his followers had families. People who loved them. Competing images of Thomas Avery and the Death Eater's victims at the World Cup flashed through her mind. People had called her a hero for that. Maybe it was better than being feted for her mother's sacrifice. Holly screamed, angry at the world and at herself. Why, she wondered, had the world decided to screw her over so thoroughly? It wasn't enough that her parents had died, that she'd been stuck with the Dursleys, she'd been handed a broken body she hated and had to fix at a pace so slow it seemed like torture. She understood, intellectually, that her potions were just as effective as ordinary female puberty. Maybe she'd have been doomed to be a stick no matter what chromosomes fate had stuck her with. She'd started them way earlier than many less fortunate girls like her. She had a supportive family and enough money to fund anything she might need. Compared to some of the people she had met at Penny's group, she was unfathomably lucky. And it still hurt. It hurt when she kissed Ginny and was reminded what she was. It hurt when she had to adjust her clothing, always keeping in mind that she wasn't a real girl. She pretended to be above Lavender and Parvati's beauty obsession, but she craved every overheard tip. A freak like her needed all the help she could get. Holly. Hermione said, on the other sound of the shower door. Holly flinched at the noise. She never wanted anyone to see her like this. Never wanted anyone to know how her hands shook and why she sometimes showered in the dark. Go away, she said, her voice hoarse. Are you okay? Hermione asked, completely ignoring the request to leave. No, Holly said, still hugging her knees. Do you want me to go get Ginny? Hermione asked, her voice so gentle. Holly felt fear race through her. That was the last thing she wanted. Please don't. I don't want her to see me like this. She's worried about you, Holly. We all are, Hermione said. I'll be fine, Holly said, between her tears. The water had slowed to a warm trickle, now, running down her hair and back. Holly. I will. I just don't want to look at myself today, okay, Hermione? So unless you've been studying permanent human transfiguration, there's nothing you can do, Holly said bitterly. Okay, Holly. But I'm going to wait out here, and you are going to do something more than brood in your dorm room today, Hermione said, and Holly let a little smile escape her black mood at her mental image of Hermione crossing her arms. True to her word, Hermione practically dragged Holly into playing wizard's chess with Ron and all but locked her in a room with Ginny. Holly's bouts of dysphoria, of that intense sense of wrongness she felt towards her own body, had been coming less and less these days. She even sort of needed her bra now. They still caught her when she was down, though, and combined with the events in the graveyard. Holly had taken a few forum showers this past week. The next day was their last full day at Hogwarts that year. The leaving feast lacked the usual celebratory banners and cheerful atmosphere. Only somber black banners hung in the Great Hall, and the food tasted like ash in Holly's mouth. The bag of gold sitting in her trunk delivered by some anonymous ministry functionary, her winnings from the tournament, weighed heavily on her. Dumbledore stood, and even the desultory conversation that had sprung up died down. Nobody so much as whispered. The end of another year at Hogwarts. What should have been a celebration of victory and brotherhood had now become a time of mourning, for someone who should be here is not, Dumbledore said, and Holly saw how pale and red-eyed many of Hufflepuff's were. How so many had come up to her and said she'd tried her best to save him. How none of them had hated her as they should have. Cedric Diggory was a brave, decent boy who wanted nothing more than to help his friend. He was a hero to those of us who feel left behind or ignored, and a friend to many. He exemplified the best traits of his house: loyalty, hard work, and friendship. His sense of fair play and honesty was legendary, and we are all the poorer for his death. Therefore, I think you deserve the truth of his death, Dumbledore said, and Holly went still. So, it seemed, did everyone else in the hall. They all knew what Dumbledore was about to say, but to hear it said like this would take it from whispered rumor to fact. When Dumbledore stood up in front of all the students of Hogwarts and said it, it would be real. Cedric Diggory was murdered by forces attempting to return Lord Voldemort to life. They succeeded. But, were it not for the actions of Hogwarts' two champions, we would not have the luxury of warning we have now. Never forget that Cedric's sacrifice may save many lives in the years to come. Never forget that without the bravery of Cedric Diggory and Holly Potter, we would have been utterly unprepared for the storm on the horizon. In these dark years that must surely come, it may prove that Cedric Diggory has already turned the tide, Dumbledore said. The words were of little help to Holly, but she knew they weren't for Holly. They were for the Hufflepuffs, who sported new looks of determination. They were for all the students who could find some meaning in Cedric's death, who could deal with the loss of their friend by seeing it as a noble sacrifice. Holly knew the truth. Cedric had been defending her when a coward cursed him in the back. He had died to save her, and Holly almost hated him for it. She raised a toast to him anyway, and let Ginny slip her hand into Holly's. It was all her girlfriend could do, but it was enough. The Triwizard Tournament's aim was to further and promote magical understanding. In the light of Voldemort's return, the ties we made this year are more important than ever. To all the guests here, I say this: these halls will serve as a refuge to you should you need it. It is only together that we will triumph, only if we set aside our divisions and unite will we emerge from this darkness, Dumbledore said, and Holly saw many of the students from Durmstrang and Beauxbatons nodding along. Remember, Cedric. Remember, if the time should come when you have to make a choice between what is right and what is easy, remember what happened to a boy who was good, and kind, and brave, because he strayed across the path of Lord Voldemort. Remember Cedric Diggory. Holly boarded the Hogwarts Express with a heavy heart, but that last journey back to the world outside Hogwarts proved to be filled with laughter. She, Ron, Ginny, and Hermione passed the time by losing to Hermione at blackjack, eating sweets, and telling all the stories they'd accumulated this year.